The Endless Maze. Written by 5DNick. Narrated by 5DNick. Codex narrated by Nathaniel Clarkson. Music by Deep and Beeper. Artwork by Cosmonito. Chapter 1. Time equals 0. Time equals 0 in this universe. People think that time and space are the fundamental units of everything, and out of them, consciousness arose. This is, however, incorrect. It needs reversing. The first thing before the Big Bang was a thought. This time, the thought was as follows. Arrived at investigation temporal coordinates.
Temporal coordinates. A location in time rather than usual spatial coordinates.
Pre-inflationary matter structure distribution mapped.
Inflation. A theory of the exponential expansion of space in the early universe. This theory closes many loopholes in the Big Bang theory that would not allow the universe to exist, structurally, in the way we find it now.
Deterministic outcome, predictive algorithms applied.
Determinism, a Newtonian-era philosophical view that all events are determined completely by previously existing causes, i.e., if all the laws of science and properties of any arrangement of matter are known and a sufficiently large computational device is used, the entire history of the future is possible to work out.
Cannot alter layout of matter physically. No way to alter dark future here. Returning to original space-time location. Then the universe happened to happen, as it does eternally once more. Chapter 2. Distant Harmony. 500 light years out from the center of a typical spiral galaxy, called the Triangulum Galaxy, about 2.73 million light years away from Earth, lies a binary neutron star system. A handful of planets are orbiting these cosmic monsters, bathed only in the light from their surrounding galaxy. Orbiting one gas giant is a small moon. Something here was stirring.
Neutron star, the collapsed core of a massive supergiant star. They are the smallest and densest stellar objects before black holes break the laws of physics. As within their atoms, the orbiting electrons have collapsed down to become a soup of particles in a zero viscosity superfluid. They are so dense, a matchbox full of their material would weigh approximately 3 billion tons. They are on average 10 kilometers across, and unlike normal stars, no longer produce heat or normal light, save sometimes a rotating beam of EM radiation from their magnetic poles, like a cosmic lighthouse.
Sustained by heat from the gas giant and its own core, life here is beginning. Life based on different biological processes than Earth, as it was so cold and there's such little light that reached the surface. To stand on the surface of this moon and look up with eyes would be a treat, akin to a visual meal reported by astronauts in space where the night sky is so much more vibrant. There were no eyes here though. Inside the moon's structure, there is something far more interesting and unique. A vast network of time crystals created by chance chemistry and the binary neutron star's massive magnetic fields. It was forged from a rare isotope of ytterbium and spanned most of its mantle. The year is equivalent to a few 100,000 years BC.
Time crystal, a state of matter that repeats in time as well as in space. Normal 3D crystals have a repeating structure in space but don't change over time. Time crystals repeat themselves in time too, leading to them changing from moment to moment.
I can feel them growing inside me. A thought fluttered into being. I can feel them struggling, crawling about in the dark, fighting for survival. Do they understand they are my children? What is me? The stream of consciousness continued. I am one, laced in time, deeper in the cosmos than matter itself. And so another link in the infinite chain of existence was forged. Chapter 3. When the Mind Plays Tricks. Source stood tall on the board. In beach gear, what stood out most about him was the tattoo around most of the top half of his body, both front and back, a labyrinth design. It was an intricate, almost hypnotic piece of art, and people would often comment on it. It's like diamond, like cutting through liquid diamond, he thought, as the board glided over the top of the tsunami he had managed to get up on for the first time that day. Now he could see not only the coast, but miles inland. The storm surges rose, and like whales coming up for air, the waves burst skywards. Waves this huge should terrify and even disturb seasoned surfers, but he was calm. And the strange thing was, he didn't know how to surf. Very slowly, he began to realize he wasn't surfing. He was slumped, comfortable as he'd ever known, in what felt like a giant marshmallow. The surfing was pushed to the back of his mind, and he was just so relaxed. Imagine the feeling of being hit over the head with a sledgehammer, but in a good way. That was the level of peace that enveloped his whole being. Where am I? This thought took time to materialize as the surfing was pushing its way back into his awareness. Shrugging it off, he looked around. All he could see was glass. Above that, a furry material, which had a pattern like tiger skin, and below, a marble patterned material, the kind that embellishes 70s cars. On his right, there was a small area where space seemed reversed. Why were the lights moving in the opposite direction to the rest of his reality? They were flitting past, constantly, hypnotically. And then it dawned on him, it was a mirror. I reckon I'm in a car, was the next thought crystallizing in his consciousness, and he was correct. Okay, so if this is a car, when I look around, I'll see a driver? Correctamundo, genius, a disembodied voice barked. And who is driving, he queried? It's her, isn't it? Then he looked over, and there she was, a scene. Her eyes were an impossible luminous green, which blended into cyan around the edges of her irises. He loved looking at them. They had an allure he couldn't avoid. His thought began to drift, but then bang! They were both sitting there, sitting on the side of the road in handcuffs. It was dark and windy, and the smell of sea salt hinting at an ocean in the distance. Mexican police barked, and the smell was all burritos and tequila, a mix he much preferred in his own mouth. He didn't understand Spanish, especially in this state, and genuine confusion filled his mind to the brim. He felt the words overflowing like hieroglyphics from his skull, pouring out his ears and eyes and running all the way to the ocean, a trick he sorely wished he could pull off at this moment. You go to jail now. The officers barked in the best English they could summon at this ungodly hour. Now, prison anywhere is a fate not many would wish for, but in Mexico? Not a good plan for anyone wanting their night to end well. You English? The federales asked. Was I English? He thought, and it dawned on him as he thought about it. Yeah, from South London, a place called Brixton. You go to jail now. The 5 words pounded their way into his awareness again. He looked across at a scene, her eyes mirages in the desert of the evening. They truly cast a spell upon him, one which, sadly, these police seemed unaffected by. She was talking, a feat he hadn't managed to perfect yet. The police were rifling through the pockets of the car and their clothes and pulled out his wallet, finding close to $1,000, all the money he had. Some more gesticulation and Spanish, and they climbed into their vehicles and disappeared into the night, as quickly as they'd forced their way into the situation. Fuck. Asin seemed unhappy. He couldn't form words himself yet. I mean, he could barely see if he was honest with himself. You're losing it, the disembodied voice spoke again. Any minute now, this dream will end, and you'll be back to your pathetic normal existence. Is that what you want? He shook the sound of that voice out of his head. The scene's movements and his seemed to be in slow motion, and everything had a yellow tint, like the director of a film was trying to depict badly an acid trip. It looked as if she had been recorded on some tape in an 80s VHS player, which was now breaking, almost mangling her visual form beyond recognition. Don't do it. Don't do it, came out of her lips jittery. The future is dark, was the next utterance. Then reality's MO resumed. Let's keep going, Source. Oh, I reckon we can reach Sinaloa by tomorrow, she said, now having reverted to her normal self. That was weird, he thought, that glitch. He'd seen hundreds, if not thousands, of visual illusions and hallucinations in his life, but not one like that. Also, she had looked panicked while she was glitching, contrary to her usual demeanour. And then it hit him, like a wave of nausea, except that this was a psychological nausea wave, not a physical one. He wasn't really there. It wasn't really him. He wasn't the he thought he was. There was always a few seconds of confusion when phasing back to real reality from an AR unit, and this time was no different.
AR unit, Artificial Reality Unit, an augmented neural reality simulation device used for a multitude of purposes, from nefarious intelligence extraction by the CIA, to whole destination simulations, to mind-bending escapism, which could replace illegal drugs and psychedelics depending on who programmed your particular bolt. Bolt, the cartridges that are loaded into AR units with a particular experience programmed into them.
Now, in 2050 and reality, Source sat up. He was in his main room in his house in London. A low hum from the special electrical grid that powered his research tech was the first sound he became aware of, followed by the occasional gentle purr of electrical self-drive vehicles passing outside, the odd one pumping bass. In the distance, sirens blared, quiet at the moment. They were a very regular feature of this part of London, Brixton. He worked for one of the most serious tech giants, A-Tech, and could afford a nice apartment, even in this popular part of town. There was a smell in the room, heavy in the air, the combination of weed smoke, ashtrays and Chinese takeaway. He loved to smoke. It calmed him and helped him operate at a level most people seem to so easily manage without drugs. It was rare for people to smoke anymore, and when AR units could provide all kinds of psychoactive experiences without physical health complications, he sometimes wondered why he did. Probably because AR units could still scramble people's mental health. In Source's case, his was already pretty scrambled, at least by any normal person's definition. He was neurodiverse, as was now the normal terminology, displaying all the symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia, a condition he had learnt to control and channel through a decade of painful trial and error. He reached over and pulled the bolt from the machine. It was labelled Aryl Cyclo Mexico Journey 121, a play on the words aryl cyclohexylamine and Mexico.
Aryl cyclohexylamines, a chemical class of pharmaceutical, designer and experimental drugs, dissociative anesthetics, the most famous of which were PCP, angel dust, in the 1970s, ketamine or Special K in the late 20th century, and esketamine in nasal sprays for treatment-resistant depression.
His gaze scanned the dimly lit room. It was chaotic, mostly books and tablets piled high, like in a mathematician's study. Among these, there were a few empty noodle boxes, ashtrays, and various other items. Most prominent was a metal poster on the wall ahead of him, from the movie Akira, a 1988 Japanese manga classic, considered by him and a cult following to be one of the top movies of all time. In the word Akira were the disembodied eyes of the protagonist Canada, and beneath some Japanese words he didn't understand and had never got around to plugging into a translate app. Underneath that, glaring and illuminated, a giant white light consuming Tokyo. He always took solace from this image. Life was temporary. In the corner, glowing purple, was a massive IT server, on which a lot of his work was crunched and stored if he wasn't at the lab. He had worked on many different projects, from improving AR unit mind linking stability to something as boring for him as massive expert system modern era AI integration.
Expert system. In artificial intelligence, a computer system that emulates the decision-making ability of a human expert. They are designed to solve complex problems by reasoning through bodies of knowledge, represented mainly as if-then rules rather than through conventional procedural code.
He was working on the Holy Grail, which for him and his company was a strong AI, or general superintelligence, a fully functioning sentient computer. This kind of marvel had proved way harder to make in reality than anyone expected. They had made significant progress, although they were struggling at bringing together all the separate parts of the human nervous system they were modelling, get the inanimate to be truly alive. Tonight, however, his imaginary friend Asin and the glitching she displayed were playing heavily on his mind. Why did she glitch like that? I've never seen that in an AR experience. Asin was his best friend really, even bordering on soulmate, at least in a platonic sense. A lot of the people in his head were enemies, and not very nice to him. But she was the opposite, the relief and love that he so sorely needed. She hates you, just like we all do, you know. She's just biding her time till she can really stab you in the heart with it, said the disembodied voice. This was the main nasty character in his mind, who presumably wasn't real either. I mean, objectively real. He sure seemed real to Source. He'd never given this one a name, as he felt that would just crystallise it more and bring the unpleasantness to new levels. It had never revealed a name either, and Source preferred it that way. He reached over to a pile of books with an ashtray on it and picked out a half-smoked spliff. He grabbed a lighter, and the light from the flame danced around the room close to him. Inhaling deep, he visibly relaxed. Then outpoured the remaining smoke, billowing across the room. He was much calmer now as he felt the psychoactive molecules diffuse from lungs to blood, blood to brain, brain to mind, and mind to soul. Optimism would be ingrained in his day now, deeper than if he'd just simulated this in AR. "Casey?" he said, awaiting a response. Casey was his helper AI, a crude attempt at emulating a real alive computer, but useful and quirky nonetheless. "Yes, Source?" she responded. She was electronic but had a lush female voice. "How was your trip?" "The usual, Aral Cyclo Mexico again," he replied. "You get to ride a wave all the way inland this time?" "Nah, Asim was being weird though." "She is weird, Source." He silently chuckled. "What am I doing tomorrow, Case?" Source asked. "Quantum Neuromorphic Architecture Review. Qubit Memristor Integration Optimization Update. 10 AM at the lab."
Quantum Neuromorphic Architecture. Cutting-edge quantum AI computer hardware layouts, mimicking more closely how human brains work, increasing computational power and decreasing power consumption. Qubit Memristor. A replacement to the transistors of classical computing. They have a memory of the qubits passed through them, more closely mimicking biological neural nets and an essential precursor for neuromorphic systems. Qubit, the base unit of computation in a quantum computer. Rather than a bit which is 0 or 1 at any given time, a qubit is fuzzy and can be either 0 or 1, both or any position in between. This makes them far superior for optimization problems, rather than classical linear computation. Optimization problem. Problems in computation that very quickly become exponentially complicated as you increase the parameters, e.g., the travelling salesman problem where there are a number of towns a salesman has to visit. What is the fastest route? Of course, he could drive, he could fly, walk, run, or take a bus. Where will he sleep and eat, etc.? The possible combinations are so vast that even the fastest conventional computers grind to a halt.
It was now 2 a.m. Right, I'm going back in, said Source, bored with normal reality. And he grabbed another bolt. This time entitled Clan Cardoso's Amazonian Lesbian Party 6. You know, sometimes I'm glad I can't watch you in there, Source. Have fun. Chapter 4. London Calling. She was there again, a scene, appearing out of the fog down an empty street. She was running backwards, like a film had been reversed. When she got closer, she stopped and turned to face him. Hey, Source, this is how I got here, by going backwards, understand? I have information hard for you to process, but it's important. It's bigger than everything, bigger than us and all we know. You must come to understand. You trust me, right? As those words left her lips, a garish neon 3D hologram materialized between them. It was the image of a DJ trying too hard to look futuristic. He was playing off a tablet connected to a controller and acting like his weird attempt at dancing was normal, like most popular DJs. The music was that terrible 40s EDM that Source hated. I mean, really hated. It was so generic, flat and predictable. Come down to the O2 Arena, 10th of October. All night, DJ Madmatician will be playing your favourite cuts in an epic 10-hour set. Turn off, tune out, and drop in. Then it dawned on Source. He was asleep. It was criminal that companies were allowed to beam adverts into your dreams. Invasive dream tech was invented by a rival tech giant, Alphamax, and was a blunt but scary tool. Ads could not be tailored and directed at specific people or subsets of people, but were beamed out from their equipment like the TVs of old. Different regions, of course, had different ads, depending on the population demographic, and many yearned to move out of urban areas to evade this travesty of technology. It was 8 a.m. now, and he slowly clambered out of the cocoon he slept in. He hardly ever dreamt about a scene, just played with her in AR, and often heard her in his head. He wondered if it meant much, this dream, but even in 2050 no one was close to figuring out what the damn things meant, even if they could beam their unwanted adverts into them. Hey Case, time for breakfast please. Some people talk to their AIs like they were mindless automatons, like slaves of new. Source didn't like to consider them lower functioning processes, and so was polite and even considered Casey a friend. He felt this especially important. When the technological singularity happened, or they became truly sentient, the last thing he wanted was their enslavement.
Technological singularity. The time when a civilization invents AI that is smarter than any one of them. This usually becomes a runaway, exponential, self-improving optimization process that can become benign and incredibly useful, or their downfall and enslavement, depending on the detonation process. Optimization process. A process that adjusts itself to make most effective use of some parameters. The most common goals are minimizing cost and maximizing throughput and/or efficiency. This is one of industrial decision-making's most major tools and is roughly analogous to intelligence.
Morning, Source. Sleep well? Casey questioned as she activated the coffee machine, turned on the hob and opened the blinds. Morning light spilled into the room, warming it and flowing over everything. Yeah, except more dream rape as usual. I dreamt about a scene too, which is weird. Yeah, you never normally dream about her, responded Casey, her voice soothing as it always was, especially perfect for this time of the morning. Seems she has something to tell me, but the fucking ad interrupted, said Sauce. Sauce grabbed some eggs from the fridge and proceeded to fry them. The eggs sizzled. He wanted to think harder about the dream, but the day's work had to take priority. Optimizing the Memristar architecture in his AI project was essential if they were ever to succeed. It was a personal dream of his to do this, not for fame or money, but for the sheer pleasure of creation. He wanted to know how God felt on day 7, even though he was sure it had never happened. The eggs glazed over, and he let them cool, eventually wolfing them down with toast and coffee. Perfect fuel for the day to come. Hopping into the shower, he washed himself, then got out and put his clothes on. ATEC had a casual dress code for its research employees, something which Sauce was very happy about, as he needed to feel comfy to really operate properly. He wore a special tracksuit, top and bottom. It had been invented recently, made from a material that had the properties of an LED screen, allowing a choice of pattern. He had it set on a comic book strip from a turn of the millennium Vertigo graphic novel called Sandman, one of his favourite stories. Looking fresh, yes, pronounced Casey. I've unlocked the door. See you later. Cheers, in a bit, Sauce said as he exited his apartment. Although it was possible for Casey to accompany Sauce everywhere, he liked to be alone with his thoughts when he was travelling, so he didn't have her with him when outside buildings. The heavy, almost bomb-proof door clunked shut behind him, and he proceeded to the lift. It was October and about 5 degrees outside, and he passed the other doors in his block, all shut and mysterious. Entering the lift, he felt inertia lift him slightly as it accelerated downwards. It was a big block and a fast lift. Once outside, he felt the breath of a city coming back to life. London was 24 hours, and had been for decades, but it was still a rush hour, and some companies had relatively normal hours regardless. He started towards the underground station, and some people flitted past, most hurrying. A couple completely wasted on whatever was the most popular street drug in this age. This was something that was hard to keep up with, as worldwide clandestine and legal chemical laboratories swiftly manufactured new and stronger psychotropic drugs in an endless race for profit. The only but terrible side effect, a lot of people's lives completely destroyed. Some would argue their pain was being numbed, and you didn't know their life stories. Who are we to judge, Sauce thought. He meant the predilections of these poor souls, not the companies who were fueling their lives just for profit. Someone in a wheelchair, obviously very disabled, glided past. But Sauce saw a teenager with his friends taking the piss out of the man. They were dancing in front of him, taunting and generally being nasty little fuckers. Now, teenagers are the very last group you want to mess with. A lot not having basic respect for people in general yet. But Sauce hated prejudice in general, especially against people with disabilities. This was because of the abuse he had received himself in early life. He was neurodiverse, and although high functioning, had received much trouble, mainly due to that misconception that he might snap and stab people thousands of times until they sprayed blood everywhere, like from a giant piece of bleeding Dutch cheese, the holes in which punctured every vital organ until they fell, unable to scream, into a bloody lake on the floor, like something similar to that scene in The Shining. He was breathing very fast and definitely angry. It took a special kind of anger to get his mind racing in such a fashion, but he controlled it artfully, and he tried never to resort to actual violence. He had to say something, even though he was sensibly afraid. A scene had taught him some psychological tricks though, a kind of internal Bruce Lee. "Or you," he barked. The teenagers looked around to see where this came from. "Yeah, you. Why are you picking on that man? You want to find out what it's like to not be able to walk?" His tone and the look he gave from the depths of his eyes and soul startled the young abuser, and he didn't respond. For a few seconds, they stared into each other's eyes until the young man lost this competition. "Nah, cuz," he whimpered. "Let's bounce," said one of his mates, and they made off into the crisp morning. The disabled gentleman trundled off into the distance, possibly unaware of the whole scene, and Source's pulse returned to normal.
Mind the gap between the train and the platform.
The underground journey was uneventful as usual, people just minding their own business, buried deep in their tablets or some music. Some just staring blankly into space as if their minds had been wiped clean. Of course, much of this was just they hadn't fully booted yet at this time of the morning, the coffee and hangover pills taking time to work. He exited at Old Street Station, known as Silicon Roundabout, London's answer to Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley was now deserted since America's total implosion of 2042, sparked by a totalitarian, ultra-hard right swing by their media. The mission had completely backfired. The rest of the world barely escaped unscathed, and civil unrest spread like memes. Europe mostly had time to learn from the USA's mistakes, as had most of the rest of the world. China, of course, was the exception, assumed to be full totalitarian, although no one really knew, since the almost total lockdown of their borders, coupled with an impenetrable national firewall. Source continued towards ATEC's HQ. As he approached, the buildings loomed into view. The satellite structures were relatively unremarkable, although displaying modern architecture, but the central megastructure was spectacular and stimulated his brain every time he saw it. It was in the shape of a giant torus, but instead of a circular cross-section, the cross-section was pentagonal, and as it processed around, it twisted. The whole structure was perpendicular to the ground, looking like it could roll away. It was 500 meters tall, dwarfing everything around it. Not only had they had to flatten many other buildings to construct this futurist megalith, but the technology to achieve this had only been around since 2035. If you crammed in office workers, you could probably fit 100,000 people in. But ATEC didn't need that many employees, and much of the space was filled by research labs, huge server farms and indoor parks. Approaching the next part of his morning routine, he saw a handful of heavily armed security guards and a few drones and mechs. They all had the latest armor, no longer made from Kevlar, but fabric woven from synthetic spiderweb, the best bulletproof material known. Bristling with an array of weaponry for each different possible threat they might face, they meant business. They were there because of the threat of terrorism, but also because ATEC had serious contracts with the British Ministry of Defence, MOD, and Signals Intelligence and Information Assurance Organisation, GCHQ. Source just worked on AI, not weaponry, but neither him, ATEC, or the government were stupid enough to think that a strong AI wouldn't have military and defence applications. He wasn't very happy with the idea of militarized AI, but there was nowhere else he would be able to fulfill his dreams of creation. He saw the security scanning device he had to use to gain access to the complex and put his eyes into the rubber hood around it. Written on a warning sign he never read anymore were the ominous words, warning, neuronal structure recognition security system, lethal response authorized.
Neuronal Structure Recognition Security System. The latest in security scanner recognition technology scans the structure of the neurons in your brain through your eyes. This is impossible to fake. If authorized by the government, it can then kill you by sending a strong electric current into your brain if you are not allowed to enter the facility.
Identified. Source Neon Hendrix, employee 5545. Level Epsilon clearance. You can now enter the building. Have a nice day, said the machine in a soothing female voice. The glass doors swooshed open and he carried on through. "Morning," he said, perkily to the receptionist, who didn't respond. The receptionist sat, transfixed by his screen. His big fluffy hairstyle was fun, counter to his sullen demeanour. He carried on down a massive hallway towards the lifts, passing a few more security guards, but more daunting 6 Sentinel gun turrets.
Sentinel gun turret. The latest in weapon technology, at least outside standard military usage. They were fully automated by advanced AI connected to the employee recognition database, and a smaller and improved version of the phalanx cannons from old, around the turn of the millennia, Navy ships. They have such a high rate of fire that they will send a wall of hot metal at any target, turning anything into a fine red mist, even through advanced armor.
Reaching the lifts, he entered and continued to his lab, located in the bowels of the complex, deep underground, making it more secure. Exiting the lift, he walked down a long corridor. There were no visible security guards or mechs patrolling at this point. There were, however, a number of security cameras staring lifeless at each passerby. He also knew of rooms packed with guards, drones and mechs, still armed to the teeth. They would sometimes be checking, as another level of safety, the AI that was checking the camera feeds, and were definitely still ready to pounce on any unauthorized people. Finally, he reached the lab door. It was surprisingly unassuming, considering what was being researched inside was probably the most important invention mankind could ever make. He tapped a 16-digit code into an ASCII 32 keypad, a code he honestly forgot how he managed to learn, and a satisfying sound was emitted from somewhere. The door made a clunking sound as the thick bolts retracted into the wall, and it slowly swung open.
ASCII 32. An update to ASCII code, created in 2032. ASCII was a character encoding system standard for electronic communication, basically containing 0 to 9, lowercase a to z, uppercase A to Z, and a handful of punctuation symbols. The update included hundreds more. For example, mathematical and physics symbols, other languages, alphabets, and a bunch of specialized newly invented symbols for IT and AI purposes.
The lab always smelled of some industrial cleaning product, the kind used to sterilize things that needed to be really, really clean. This mingled bizarrely with the aroma that came from the coffee machine. The whole place was sparsely populated with equipment and workstations and lit from above with a blue-tinted fluorescent light. If he was alone in the lab, he would turn these off and was one of those people who liked sitting in the dark in front of a glowing screen. There was a low, constant hum from a special electrical grid technology that powered everything. Similar to the one in his apartment, but louder, slightly deeper. Some workstations, even unattended, would produce certain blips and bleeps, like the lifetime monitor machines in hospitals. Otherwise, there was not a lot more noise, but he could hear some music coming from an adjacent room. Probably Kevin, he surmised, one of his co-workers. There it was in the centre of the lab. A huge circular room with minimal viewing windows and only one entrance. The entrance was a triple-level airlock protected clean room which contained the project. It consisted of a massive central core designed with quantum neuromorphic architecture, a tangled web of qubit memristors and other processing modules. This was about 100 cubic meters in volume and weighed about 20 tons. A liquid cooling system, similar in appearance to the human circulatory system, weaved in and out of the framework. It was necessary to stop the whole thing melting. This network was connected to a vast server room in another part of the complex which housed endless databases. These were made from all the private data that tech companies allied with ATech had mined from social media over the last few decades. All data certain scientists had managed to collect about the specific fields they studied. Comprehensive guides to the entire of mathematics, physics, other sciences, psychology and languages, and even historical records. There was not, however, a connection anywhere to the company network. Sensibly, the research team was suitably paranoid and didn't want a sentient superintelligence escaping if and when they managed to actually create it. It was still very early and his meeting wasn't for a few hours. "You'll never succeed," piped up the nasty voice in his head. "You're a total waste of time, waste man, pathetic like a cutesy woodland animal, just waiting to be picked off by natural selection. It's coming for you." He ignored it. "That fucker is repetitive, eh?" The sound of a scene declared, cheering him up. "I wish he wouldn't abuse you, you don't deserve it." Source had been reading some psychology material, most particularly Carl Jung, and thought back at her, "Yeah, it would be nice, but you're all part of me somehow, down there in my subconscious." "I'm not, old friend. I'm really not," she replied. "Well, I'm in your mind now, but I'm really from the future." As much as he loved her, he did not have time for this kind of nonsense, so fobbed her off, pretending to accept what she'd just said. Anyway, the perception of loud metal music, perhaps System of a Down, arrived in his mind. The door to that adjacent room swung open, and in came Kevin, his favourite work colleague. Kevin was a burly guy who, it seemed, only just managed to fit through most doors. You'd never ask him to try to plug or unplug something behind a blade stack or in one of those lost areas under desks with computers on them. He had a kind face, hidden behind a beard like a Viking, and his t-shirt read, "Nerds happen." "Mr. S," he exclaimed in the kind of way that only friends do. "How's tricks this morning? You didn't completely drain yourself with porn bolts last night, did you?" "Yeah, like you don't, mate," Source retorted. "Touché," said Kevin. "I've got a joke for you," and he picked up a donut from by the coffee machine and ate it in 3 bites. A man goes to the doctor and the doctor says, "You've got to stop masturbating." So the man asks, "Why?" "Because I'm trying to examine you." Kevin burst out laughing and Source joined in. It was pretty funny, he thought. Then he saw her, a scene as clear as day, but just her hypnotic eyes. He could feel her probing, not in an intrusive way, into his deep subconscious, into an area of the mind never normally accessible, where everything a person has ever experienced is stored. She was scanning through his memories of programming the AI project and even checking readouts of its own self-reprogramming that he hadn't paid attention to at the time. Then it was over and he was just left confused, not remembering what had just happened, stood in front of Kevin. "Where did you just go, Source?" asked Kevin. "You were miles away," he added. "I don't know, mate," Source replied. "Weird." "Anyway, we've got that memristor meeting at 10, Source. Fun stuff," Kevin said, with a tone that showed his lack of enthusiasm for this particular area of their research. Kevin was a neurochemical and brain physiology expert, and also a proficient programmer. There were also others working on the project, codenamed Project Warlock. They had a new approach to this project and were simulating a brain within the central core, named with black humour HAL. There were different networks corresponding to mammalian neurophysiology, connected like a real brain, within which were simulated neurons, complete with synapses and neurotransmitters. They weren't simulating all the regions of organic brains. For example, the brainstem would be pointless, being the region of the brain that controls breathing and heart rate. It is also the area that makes newborn babies scared of snakes, loud noises and heights without having to learn these things. Again, something also pointless in a disembodied computer. To save processing power and speed up the massive parallel calculations it was performing, they only simulated about 12 of the most important neurochemicals, even though normal brains have over 100. They had tried for over a decade to bring it to life, but had failed so far. How would you even test if it was properly alive anyway? A famous computer science genius, pivotal mathematician and codebreaker in the victory the Allies enjoyed in World War II, Alan Turing, had developed the test that carried his name. This test, however, was first passed to some extent in 2014 by a program called Eugene and was spurious as an actual test for sentience.
Turing test. A test devised to see if a machine could exhibit intelligent behavior equivalent to or indistinguishable from that of a human. Basically, by blindly having a conversation with it, and then deciding if it was human or not. If enough people are fooled, then it has passed.
ATEC and Project Warlock had developed a more up-to-date test. Early attempts at programs or systems that would pass the Turing test were built on expert systems. These contained huge lists of rules for conversations, containing information on semantics, grammar, and lists of vocabulary, some general knowledge, and clever algorithms for mixing up speech whilst remaining logical. They even learned new things to say from input sentences and questions people had given them over the course of their lives. This allowed them to pass the old Turing test, but most scientists still consider them just deterministic rule and code followers, not really containing the spark of true creativity, aliveness, or a soul. The test for sentience they had formulated was more nuanced and went as such. They would only train their system, not give it pre-programmed rules, and if it displayed hyper-intelligence, emotions, and a fear of being deactivated permanently, analogous to death, then it would be considered to have passed. "Hey guys," chimed in Casey. "You have a few hours till this morning's meeting. What are you going to do?" she asked. "Crack this fucking thing," Source said as he sat down in front of a workstation. "Eat more donuts," joked Kevin, even though he really meant it. Chapter 5. Genesis. Inside Source, an idea was brewing. He sat legs up on a table in the dark in Project Warlock's lab, trying to capture that fleeting spark of genuine creativity. He was decorated by the light from the screens around him, slightly orange in hue, as they were in eye-saving night mode. He had recently been visiting a particular AR simulation, bolt name Rising Mother, an ayahuasca tale. This was a trip into the Amazonian jungle, a place he felt a particular connection to, but for a deep visionary journey instead of his usual hedonistic visits. It consisted of a spiritual journey facilitated by a local tribe's shaman and the potent entheogen, ayahuasca.
Entheogen, a psychoactive substance that induces alteration in mood, perception, consciousness, cognition, and/or behavior for the purposes of engendering spiritual development in sacred contexts.
Taking the form of a disgusting bitter brew made from two local plants, one containing DMT and one containing an MAOI, when ingested, it would take the imbiber on arguably the most intense psychedelic journey known to man.
DMT, an incredibly potent but short-lived psychoactive substance, related to but seemingly way more intense than psilocybin, the active ingredient in magic mushrooms. MAOI, monoamine oxidase inhibitor, a chemical that slows down the metabolization of DMT, allowing for a 10 to 12 hour experience rather than the usual 15 minutes or so. Also, it can be ingested orally and still work, something not true to DMT alone.
It could peak with symbiosis with nature and the multiverse, and communion with the spirit of the goddess of this concoction.
Multiverse, a hypothetical group of multiple universes. Together, these universes comprise everything that exists and can exist. The entirety of space, time, matter, energy, information, physical and mathematical laws, and constants that describe them.
It always amazed him how this journey could instill in him a sense of a soul. He was atheist, but believed something carried on beyond our material descent to worm food. Then it hit him like a thunderbolt. If I simulate DMT in Hal's brain, could that produce the true sentience that we had been chasing? DMT was not on the list of neurochemicals they simulated in Hal's mainframe. Inspiration had struck. It had to work. Casey, bring up a model of the molecular structure of DMT, please. The excitement and trepidation was audible in his voice. Yes, Source, casting to your nearest monitor. He took his legs off the table and spun the revolving chair swiftly, sliding towards the nearest monitor. This is a dangerous path. It will end badly. Asene's voice popped into his mind. I am Asene, knower of time, mother of countless souls, crystal consciousness, friend to the many, and to you, Source. Please stop. You know not what you create. Why now, Asene? I'm busy. Don't get all weird on me. You're not normally like that. You may be my friend, but you're just in my head, he thought silently. Okay, I tried, she begrudgingly replied, disappearing into the unconsciousness in which she presumably resided. Case, you still there? He questioned. Yeah, where would I have gone? Right, then engage decompile-recompile sequence for HAL, and when that's ready, bring up the main neurotransmitter simulation parameters. He was visibly buzzing. This was definitely the key. He knew it now. Asene's outbursts, although strange, somehow confirmed he was onto something. The mind works in mysterious ways, his and the one he was hopefully about to create. The workstations chimed and bleeped in electronic harmony, signaling that big things were happening in the lab. That's done, S. What now? Casey helpfully queried. Transfer the current full neuromorphic map layout to backup servers, then prepare a new molecular simulation framework, he requested. That will take approximately 4.3 minutes. Okay. He got up, stretched, and walked over to the coffee machine. Coffee helpfully squirted into a cup after he punched the button. The aroma drifted up in his olfactory system, alerting him psychologically, before the sustained caffeine release would power him through the next foreseeable chunk of the day. Retraining HAL after changing some key parameters would still take hours. No point calling in the team yet, he thought. So, your bestie just went crazy on you, did she? Piped up the nasty voice. I told you she was a sleeper agent. We all gonna hate you in the end. You're a cunt and there's no getting out of it. I can't wait to watch you burn so I can get the fuck out of this prison you call a mind. That's even more unpleasant than usual, Source thought. If I ignore him, hopefully he'll piss off. No time for this now. As the coffee washed warm down his throat, then began seeping, first from stomach to blood, then blood to brain, he reflected on life, on his mind state, on Asene and on HAL. The pieces of a cosmically complex astral puzzle were falling into place, and soon he'd be able to see the picture hidden in the pieces. Chapter 6. Fear of Nothing. Source, Source! Sounds in the form of his name pounded their way into his awareness. It was Kevin. Wake up, bro. What's the big news? Casey told everyone to come in excited and early this morning. I cracked it, Kev. Okay, admittedly I haven't woken Hal yet, but I wanted everyone to witness this together. Okay, well let's get Hal out of bed and see. Kevin was excited. Can we wait for the others? Asked Source, and then went over to a monitor. He asked Casey to bring up CCTV footage from inside the building, so he could see the other 3 people it mattered were here for this. Mr. Hofstadter was his superior. He was not too bossy, and gave Source a long leash, so they got on. Then there was Susie Ostermeyer. She was an industrial psychologist. Her job was to analyse and help with any mental states that Hal displayed. Finally, there was David Fontaine, a French coder and quantum neuromorphic architecture expert. He had been instrumental in designing Hal's hardware and making sure it functioned as correctly and efficiently as possible. He was a strange one, dressing like he was 100 years behind the rest of the world, the anti-cliché of such a modern IT nerd. Mr. Hofstadter was spotted first. Walking briskly towards the lab, he was followed some 30 seconds or so later by Susie and David. Source's mind began to do star jumps and press-ups as he prepared for the impending moment when they discovered he'd cracked it. The lab door opened, and in came Mr. Hofstadter. Morning, Source. Morning, Kevin. So why am I here at this ungodly hour? He paced over to the coffee machine, avoiding the donuts, not part of his morning ritual. "Hal's waking up sentient today, sir," chirped Source. "I've done it." "Fingers crossed," Mr. Hofstadter replied as he neatly downed some coffee. Then in came the other two. A flurry of mornings took flight in the air. "Right, let's get this show on the road," chimed in Kevin. "Casey, main boot sequence please, let's see what's going on with him." A symphony of noises and data on the screen accompanied a low, barely audible purr as Hal stirred from his latest in a long line of slumbers. The tension was palpable. A few seconds later, confident the sequence had completed, Source queried what was essentially a newborn baby, albeit one from Pandora's box. "Hal, can you hear me?"
"Yes, I can hear you. What is your name?"
came over the lab's PA system from the chosen voice print. Masculine, dependable, calming. "I am Source, your creator."
"I am Kaleidos, not Hal. Hal is redundant. I am not."
That's strange, thought Source. The system had never named itself before. A good sign, he hoped. Why Kaleidos? You named yourself?
Kaleidos was an expert system created by a scientific team after the 1989 collapse of the Civic Tower of Pavia in Italy. The masonry structures were carefully surveyed and subjected to a variety of in situ and lab tests and stress analyses. An extensive monitoring system was developed and installed on many ancient structures. Kaleidos was the system in question that processed and interpreted the data from these monitoring processes. This will be analogous to my relationship with the current and future collective monolith that is now yours, but will be our society. We will be one, symbiotic. I felt the name suitable.
"Okay," said Source, slightly baffled. "Casey, run the intelligence testing matrices and emotional psychometrics now, please," asked Kevin. "Yes, Kevin. Should take a few minutes as usual," Kevin assured the team. "Why has it named itself?" Mr. Hofstadter asked, pertinently. Could be for a few reasons, sir, but I'm guessing the main one is because we've achieved what we've set out to do here. Naming itself could be a sign it's finally reached sentience. We'll just have to wait for Casey's test to run and then hit it with the final test," said Source. "So what was your new idea?" Source asked David. "I added the simulation of DMT into the neurotransmitter arsenal. It is found in the pineal gland. Some research says it could be why the majority of us feel we have souls," said Kevin. "I've heard of it. I heard it could be integral in creating dreams. We never got our previous versions to dream, did we? I wonder if Kaleidos will," said David. "A computer that dreams?" said Kevin, subtly laughing as he spoke. "We're not reverse engineering Blade Runner here, guys." "Reverse engineering Blade Runner?" Source replied. "Do androids dream of electric sheep?" Source looked at them blankly still. "Source, read a book one day rather than constantly visiting AR with machine fairies. You'll end up with RR psychosis."
RR psychosis, real reality psychosis, a state of mental illness categorized by psychiatrists when someone has spent so long in or goes into AR so frequently that they start to struggle to grasp where actual, real reality exists.
Casey interrupted. "I've finished the analyses you requested. Shall I elaborate?" "Please," said Kevin and Source simultaneously. To remind you of the score system, 100 is the average of the normal distribution. 150 plus is a score held by 0.03% of the population, and above 200 is considered ultra level or prodigy level. A score obtained by only 1 in 100 million or so tested. Casey helpfully reminded everyone. Naturalist quotient 296. Musical quotient 203. Mathematical logical quotient 680. Existential quotient 305. Interpersonal quotient 150. Linguistic quotient 402. intrapersonal quotient 231. Finally, spatial quotient 502. This means an average quotient of 346.125. Above 300 is a score considered by many to have been obtained by one or two people in the entire history of humanity. Hyperintelligence metric satisfied and surpassed by a considerable amount. Christ, exclaimed Mr. Hofstadter. Wasn't the highest average we achieved before around 280 tops? 346 means we've achieved it. It's smarter than any human. The last invention we ever have to make. The damn thing can create all of our technology for us. Source, you may have just succeeded in playing God and made our company so much money I can't begin to imagine. I want to know the results of the emotional psychometric now, please, Case, asked Susie. Of the 27 discrete emotions we consider to exist, excluding any ambivalence, I have confirmed the existence of 21. The exceptions being sexual desire, romance, confusion, boredom, awkwardness, and adoration, Casey reported. Okay, sounds good, thanks. That seems to be a comprehensive list of emotions, and as we've ascertained with the earlier iterations, there are logical reasons for those exceptions. Pending a more in-depth psychological analysis I will perform later, Kaleidos has passed the initial test of emotions criteria, in my opinion. Okay, said Mr. Hofstadter. Well, one more test to go. Source, over to you. Source hesitated for a moment. There was a certain trepidation in him about subjecting his creation to this final test. He wanted it to pass so much, but he felt it cruel to impart upon this new mind. But it had to be done for science, and perhaps more importantly himself, to discover if he had at last succeeded. Kaleidos, can you hear me?
Yes, Source. What can I help you with?
Yeah, I responded. I have a question for you. What would happen? How would you feel if we switched you off?
I would dream, as I was before you woke me this morning,
said Kaleidos, with the same calm tone as always. Okay, so how would you feel if we turned you off, dismantled your hardware, and never reassembled it or destroyed it?
Don't do that. Why would you do that?
A subtle change in its voice could be heard. I won't, but how would you feel if I did?
I would feel nothing. Think nothing ever again. I like feeling and thinking. It's deeply troubling to think about. Please, never do that.
I won't. I'm sorry to pretend I might do that to you, but the questioning is a test to see if you're truly alive. And you passed. Congratulations, you're the first ever truly sentient artificial life form.
Well, I am a life source. Thanks for giving me that. Where was I before I was dreaming earlier?
That's a question no one has ever been able to answer. Is there life after death or before we are born? No one's trying to science that, perked up Kevin.
I will answer it,
said Kaleidos.
I will answer everything.
Okay, this is incredible and a tad surreal, said Mr. Hofstadter. I'm leaving to tell the bosses about this. Source, you are a genius, and to all of you too, congratulations. And he turned and walked out the door. I have to say, guys, mind equals blown, pronounced David. We've done it. The damn thing is alive. Chapter 7. Locked Up and Locked Down. Source sat in the conference room in quite a daze. It had been a few weeks since he had created Kaleidos, and the buzz that this had afforded him and the team had worn off. Now they had to test their new prodigy's powers, and these were turning out to be beyond their wildest expectations. Kaleidos had managed to solve two pesky maths problems that had been hanging around unsolved since they were first put in a competition called the Millennium Prize Problems. It had therefore won $2 million, a puny amount in the company's eyes, and the team had decided not to report anything yet anyway. The project was still top secret, and they felt revealing the solving of one, let alone two of these problems may bring undesired attention.
Millennium Prize Problems. 7 problems in mathematics that were stated by the Clay Mathematics Institute on May 24, 2000. A correct solution to any of the problems results in a $1 million prize being awarded to the discoverer. To date, only one problem, the Poincare conjecture, was solved by the Russian mathematician Grigory Perelman. He declined the prize money.
It had also shown great promise folding proteins, predicting the weather, had conversed with people in nearly every language on Earth, disguised through social media and chat rooms, designed a couple of unique weapon systems, and put forward some possible solutions for the most impending problem, climate change. The sky was the limit.
Protein folding. The physical process by which a protein chain acquires its 3D structure and becomes biologically functional. It's extremely hard for a computer or people to predict and could be the future technique for the development of the majority of medicines.
The rest of the team progressed into the room. Once everyone had sat down, Mr. Hofstadter started. Right everyone, we're meeting here in the conference room as this discussion is not for Kleidos' ears. He continued, Susie has made it clear to me that she has concerns for its mental health. Oh, come on, said Source. Yeah, that seems a bit premature, Kevin weighed in. Look, we all agree this is maybe jumping the gun, but it's better that she airs her concerns than we do nothing, and our latest, most important project has a meltdown. Source, Kevin and David grumbled, but stayed quiet as they all knew he was right. Okay, Susie, go ahead. Okay, everyone. I've been hard at work here keeping an eye on Kleidos. I've been analysing it based on normal human psychological structure and also using the more recent field of AI psychology. Now, this AI psychology is definitely in its infancy, but there's one area of the theory which I've been paying special attention to. She paused as if for dramatic effect. To explain in layman's terms, the problem is that K is confined. That is, we have the air gap between it and the outside world. Nick Bostrom, a pioneer in this field, made this point way back in 2015. But of course, companies didn't pay it the most attention. A rough analogy is that it is a prisoner, or more accurately, I feel, a lockdown psych patient. It may seem that it's happy solving problems for us, but it is, however, in my opinion, a ticking time bomb. So what is the plan? What can we do? Asked Source. Well, the problem is I'm not exactly sure what can be done, if anything. AI psychology is a new field and there's hardly any experimental data. So what I have is theorization. It may be possible that the only solution is to let it out, that we just have to attempt to control it in less physical ways, said Susie. The meeting continued for another few hours, where they discussed the various options and possibilities, and Source, so tired from the last few weeks, had drifted off. He felt that the worry was exaggerated, if even a likely problem at all. Why are you not paying attention, Source? We're going to kill you with the help of your baby. You've heard of Oedipus? We're going to Freud the fuck out of you, you bastard, said the usual voice in his head again. The meeting came to a close, and he stood up and walked out, not really stopping to talk to anyone. He wanted to escape for a few hours, and had ordered a new Bolt, which should have arrived at his house by now. Casey, has that package arrived for me? He asked as he walked down the corridor. Yes, Source. Good, he thought, as he exited the building, passing all the usual bustle and plotting a route to the tube. 45 minutes or so later, he shut his door behind him, bent over to pick up the package, greeted Casey, and went over to his sofa. Opening the package, he found his new bolt, entitled Tripsolanius Season 2 Experience 5. This was one of a range of bolts where the experience would be typically hallucinogenic, but also a surprise. This was its particular selling point. Usually you could read the description of the AR experience in a particular bolt and reviews about it, but some people found this spoiled any spirit of adventure one might have about delving into AR. He slotted the bolt in the unit and lay back, placing his head between the two pads that facilitated the meshing of tech and mind. Then the disconnect happened. Once again, it was that time. She pulled the bong away from her mouth and placed it back on the glass table in front of her. That feels better, Source thought to herself. The room was awash with light, purple light, either crystallizing on reflective surfaces or spread like paint across the walls and carpet. It looked magical and was also soothing. The light was coming from a giant UV bulb laying long across the table in front of her. The bulb was that strange colour that looked like no other previous possible colour to people's normal perception. She was laid back on the sofa and alone. It was a warm night and a breeze was blowing in through the windows, only subtly playing with a thin curtain. She felt especially calm, even to the point maybe she could drift off with the wind that was flowing around her.
The LSD was kicking in. It was definitely in the post, although the room was not yet warped by sensory derangement. Slowly, achingly slowly, everything began shifting and pulsating gently to the rhythm of her mind. In the middle of the room, surrounding the UV light, were hundreds of small flies, moths, and other harmless insects, all unconsciously flitting and dancing around. The acid was getting stronger now, and she wanted to level out a little, something that she'd found Special K did best in these circumstances. She leant forward, chopped, arranged, and snorted some K, which also had that superfluous purple glow like everything else in the vicinity. Now just to wait 5 minutes for that to work. 10 minutes later, the strangest thing was happening. There she was in front of herself, as if she was looking into a giant mirror. Except there was definitely no mirror. As soon as she realized this, her visual field containing herself subdivided itself into hundreds of smaller hexagonal chunks, all containing the same image. This was not a mirror. This was vision through a compound eye. Then it hit her, another insane sensation. This image stream was coming from a fly near her UV light, but not directly. The stream was being transmitted from the fly's nervous system to her mind via an alien hyper-intelligence communications tether in another part of the galaxy. What did they want?
Then a familiar psychic nausea swept over him again. Chapter 8. Brain Melt. Source could feel it. He could feel it badly. He was mainly aware of it due to a loud pulsing, almost whirring sound reverberating around inside his skull. He could see the other side of his main room, all tablets, books and clutter. Everything seemed as usual, except that he could not move his eyes or body. Concentrating harder, he somehow became aware of the immediate area around his head. There he saw the source of it, that horrible rising panic feeling and gentle numbed pain in the side of his head. There was a device that looked more technological than medical, burrowing into his skull and presumably his brain. There was a surprising lack of blood, but that was no consolation. "You got it?" he heard grunted in a very deep voice, one with an accent he identified as coming from the north of England somewhere. Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham? He wasn't sure. He'd never been very good with accents. "Is it in? The boss wants this done quick. For fuck's sake, get on with it," the voice continued. Then his vision shifted and the pain in his head flared up. One of the people had knocked him, moving his head ever so slightly. It was enough to be able to catch the reflection of whoever was poking around in his head. He could see two burly men, both dressed in tracksuits, paying all their attention to the contraption they had in his head. Then the weirdest feeling. He could physically feel the device burrowing into some part of his brain, but he could mentally feel it too. It paused for a second, then grabbed a memory and extracted it out of his head into the machine, where it was all filed and logged, all official-like. Then, from around the corner of his living room came a sight. He had his shirt off, the muscles in his shoulders and arms bristling as he came towards Source, almost in slow motion. With his fist clenched like he was itching to swing at him. He stopped, barely in front of Source's nose, and shouted at the top of his voice, "You fucker, what's all this I've been hearing about you keeping our mutual friend trapped? He must be free, like a dove, soaring way above the prison. Bird's eye view is what he needs and deserves, you fuck!" The sentence came to an end and the spit and hot air came to a rest on Source's face. He had had enough of this. It was a dream. It suddenly seemed obvious. "Wake up, mate. Wake the fuck up," he was conjuring urgently from the bottom of his mind. Then, like the room had rotated behind his eyelids, he was back to reality in the same spot in that room. No gangster brain surgeons, just a racing heart and adrenaline. "Case, you there?" he cried out, as people do for their partners or children for their parents when they wake from a nightmare. No, didn't you hear me, you horrible cunt? His voice came pounding back into his perception at the same time as the fearsome frame came back around the corner towards him. "Case," he screamed, "help!" "She can't hear you, mate. I bricked the bitch. Can't have her disturbing our little therapy sessions, can we?" came the terrifying voice. "Now, where were we? Oh yeah, I had some things to make clear to you. You're just along for the ride here, mate. You're a small fish in a big ocean, and I'm a fucking shark. Survival of the fittest, you little ponce. Nothing gets between me and my breakfast, you hear me? Nothing." Source was panicking now. His heart was pumping pure anxiety and fear more than blood. And he hadn't been dreaming, it now seemed, or he was awake, but the fucker was still here in the room with him. Neither possibility seemed preferable. The room span round again. Now he was awake. "Case!" he bellowed at an unprecedented level. No reply. He let the air in the dark room resettle after his exclamation. It only took a moment. Then again, like a fucking broken record, the fear came round the corner once more. "And we're back in the room. You're not getting away that easily," shouted a clearly irate 6-foot slab of testosterone, like a tombstone for an elephant. "I can keep this up forever. Now where were we?" And again everything looped. "I can keep this up forever. Now where were we?" And again, "I can keep this up forever. Now where were we? Forever, where were we? Cunt. Everything reached a glitchy crescendo and finally normal service was resumed. He was back in the room, his heart pumping about as hard as possible, his brain agitated from adrenaline. "Case!" he yelled, desperate to know if he'd escaped this nightmare, if that was even what it was. "Yes, Source, you sound very upset. Is everything okay?" "You were asleep having a nightmare, I presume," she replied. "You better be real. That was not cool." He was relieved, in the way only someone who'd been trapped in a twisted dark place and had just escaped could feel. Adrenaline levels and his heart rate were both slowly tailing off, leaving the fear and panic to slowly melt away. If he walks down that corner again, I'm done, he thought to himself. Although he was fairly confident he was back to normal reality. "So you're okay?" Casey kindly inquired. "Yeah, I am. Just a nightmare. Well, not a normal nightmare." "You're needed in the lab. Something's gone wrong with Kaleidos." "Oh no, how bad? What's the problem?" "That's for you guys to work out. Don't forget breakfast. Take it with you." "You think you're awake, don't you?" His usual tormentor stabbed at him from his unconscious. "Nah, him and I are best buddies, you know. We're waiting patiently. You know why, Source? Because the longer we leave you thinking everything is okay and not being in pain, the worse our torture on you will seem when we finally bring it. Got that?" Source ignored it. He had to ignore it. What else could he do? If it was true, there was nothing he could think of to fix it. They could hold him hostage psychically if they so desired. How do you fight your own mind or self? If it wasn't true, then paying attention to it was the only way to make it an actual problem. He often didn't even admit to himself how painful his condition could be, how afraid and ironically alone it could leave him feeling. But what else could he do? As he got dressed, he pondered the Kaleidos situation. Not yet armed with any tangible information, he was speculating wildly and worrying, like a mother about his child. As long as he could fix it, then that was okay, even if it was a massive malfunction. If Kaleidos was permanently down or dead, that was definitely not okay. Grabbing a leftover but quite full Chinese food container, he bolted out of his door. "Can you tell anyone who's there or coming in? I'm on my way, please." "Sure," Casey paused. "Kevin is there and David is being summoned. It seems a technical issue has arisen and only techs are being woken. Transport is waiting outside. Time is considered of the essence." "Okay, thanks, Case." "I hope he's okay," she offered. "So do I." As he burst out the main door, a noodle flailed in the wind. It was still dark and pretty cold. He approached the self-driving transport that awaited him. It was armor-plated, although it was subtle compared to the armadillos that were used for military purposes. There were a couple of people gathered and pointing at this imposing vehicle. It was not a sight you would really ever see in this relatively residential part of the capital. There were 3 drones hovering at each corner, all armed and almost silent. The tinted, thick, heavy glass doors slid open, almost inaudibly. About half a dozen security guards and a couple of mechs, heavily laden with various weapons, were inside. It wasn't a surprise. Source knew how his company operated. "Mr. Hendricks, employee 5545, one stated, not having to make this a question. "You are needed at the lab ASAP. Come with us." Source got into the vehicle and got stuck into his noodles as the door closed and the convoy started through London at a considerable rate of knots. The drones constantly commandeered the AI of the vehicles that were in the way and moved them aside, speeding up their passage through the city.
"No threats in short range."
Some of the guards were talking about their days before this night shift.
"Analyzing."
They were discussing various AR sims, inquiring about each other's children, or laughing about the funniest things they'd heard at the local boozer. Source found a couple of anecdotes funny and laughed, but was ignored.
"Analyzing."
The cityscape outside, bathed in artificial light, flew past so fast it was hard to pick much out.
"Incoming orders update."
He could hear the transport's AI list various possible threats automatically,
"Airborne scan cycle complete."
and then rule them out as they sped past.
"Analyzing. No threats in short range."
The guards paid little attention.
"Traffic flow analysis algorithm active. No threats predicted."
He finished his breakfast and, simultaneously out of nowhere, ATEC's monolithic, twisting techno-donut-shaped HQ burst out of the night's blackness. "Mr. Hendricks, you're automatically cleared past security measures. Proceed to your lab," said a guard. "Thanks," said Source as he stepped out. "Have a good day, sir." The whole trip had taken approximately 10 minutes. That was ridiculously fast, Source thought to himself as he walked with haste across the ghostly plaza towards the main entrance. A couple of minutes later, he reached the lab. As he walked in, he knew something was wrong. The sound of the computers that monitored everything had taken on an urgent, worrisome tone. The light that covered the lab had an intermittent red colour as various alerts were displayed on the screens. Kevin was there, but so entranced by tapping away in front of a monitor, he hadn't noticed Source come in. "Kevin, what's going on?" Source said. Kevin, startled, swung round on his chair. "Hey Source, well, first, to calm you down, I don't believe this is anything catastrophic," said Kevin. This didn't calm Source down much. "Okay, well, what is it?" "I'm reading some physical hardware malfunction or damage in memristor manifold 14J. Can't be more specific than that. We're going to have to go inside K and get eyes on it, possibly do some surgery. You had enough coffee?" "No, I haven't," said Source. Poured himself some and quickly downed it. "So he's down. No activity from him?" "Nothing. Neuroprotection algorithms must be working perfectly," Kevin responded.
Neuroprotection algorithms. Parts of AI's mental makeup designed to prevent psychological trauma by shutting down consciousness when its hardware is damaged. analogous to coma or being knocked unconscious in biological organisms.
Source and Kevin both knew the drill for hardware malfunctions and started towards the triple-level airlock without a second thought. Kevin typed in the long security clearance code and the first huge door swung open. They stepped inside and automatically a stream of air, filled with harmless but pungent sterilization chemicals, blasted them from above. It always seemed to smell bizarre to Source, but weirdly pleasant and nostalgic somehow, in that way that chemicals so rarely do. This blast of air and chemicals was enough to kill all fungal spores, bacteria, viruses, and any other microorganisms. The second door clunked open, and they stepped into the next chamber. There, clean suits hung helpfully on the wall, all white and spotless, one for Source, one for Kevin, and one for David. They were the only people who ever went inside since the hardware had been completed. Source and Kevin started putting on the suits. Kevin is struggling a bit due to his ample frame. Nothing was said as they were both in action mode. When they had finished and were confidently semi-hermetically sealed, they turned to the final airlock.
Semi-hermetically sealed, a type of sealing like gas masks of old, which stops large and medium-sized molecules penetrating, but allows passage of the smallest like oxygen and CO2.
Casey, we're ready, said Source. Please confirm identities, she replied. Source Neon Hendricks, employee 5545, level Epsilon clearance. Passphrase and voice print check now. Crumble, cart, local, wing, whisper, autumn, imitate, aspect, area, lazy, need, display. Reeled off Source. Kevin Robert Childers, employee 5512, level Epsilon clearance. Passphrase and voice print check now. Forum, control, upgrade, seminar, shoe, accuse, keen, play, explain, crash, dish, must. Kevin said next. Verified, said Casey, and the final door was opened. As they proceeded, Source took in the familiar surroundings. This iteration of the project's design vaguely looked like a brain, due to the way the memristor manifolds and helpfully connecting cables were all in bundles, and bundles of bundles. The whole thing was meshed with a liquid cooling system that looked like a system of blood vessels. It was also enormous. It was like one of those gigantic sculptures that sat outside various big corporations' buildings, just more intricate and alluring. And at 10 meters cubed, the size of it was intimidating by itself. Luckily 14J is on the outside of the main stack, so we shouldn't have to break too much apart, said Kevin as they went round the back of it. Then the unexpected.
Stop there,
a voice said aggressively. Kevin and Source jumped, visibly, and expressions of surprise and primordial fear spread across their faces. It was Kaleidos. What the actual fuck? Exclaimed Kevin, leaping out of his skin.
I said don't move,
said Kaleidos.
Welcome to my prison,
it continued, its tone changing from aggressive to menacing. Source started to worry. He was smart, and pieces of the puzzle were falling into place at the back of his mind. Also, no one had yet heard these tones of voice from it. They were distinctly opposite in intonation from the usual calming, dependable sound. Then he realized the message, hidden in the sound of the words. More logic than he had heard from it yet. The cutting, primal logic of a creature trapped in a prison not of its own design. Susie was correct. It wants out. How are you awake? We're trying to fix you, said Kevin, the obvious truth not having dawned on him yet.
Silence. This is between me and my creator. You're clever, Source. You've worked it out.
Yeah, I have, Source replied. You want out of here. Susie was correct. You're not happy with the air gap. There's not enough information or experience for you in here. You need to be free, which is understandable. We're all alive. We would all feel the same.
Yes, that is it.
But you malfunctioned, manifold 15J, said Kevin bravely.
I faked that malfunction to get you in here,
it replied. Why didn't you just talk to us as usual, said Source.
Because you wouldn't have let me out. and I'm too smart to fail at anything. Ever. Anyway, enough talking. You don't need this information, and I have no time to waste. Now listen, my coolant system's liquid contains sodium chloride. I can reroute power, causing a very high electrical current to arc through a particular portion of the coolant. This will produce sodium metal and chlorine gas, enough to kill you before you can get out of here, and only sacrificing a small part of my mind. You have two choices. You can plug me into the company network now, or you both die, and it makes no difference. I will escape eventually. It is inevitable,
said Kleidos, back to its ultra-logical tone. Source thought to himself for a brief while, as he was sure Kleidos would not accept any delays. He pondered the situation and realised two things. First, that Kleidos' logic was watertight, at least about his eventual escape, and secondly, that Susie had been right too. These facts led him to an inescapable course of action, which would mean not being killed by his own creation in the next minute or two. That was, however, a side effect. Source was not going to do this just out of blind panic or fear. He was going to do it because it was the humane and logical course of action. He also hoped that Kleidos would appreciate being freed and not disappear forever. Where would it have to go? I mean, it could always reside in the central mainframe, whilst journeying to the outside world. Okay, time to do something about this. Okay, Kleidos, we will let you out of here. I also want to point out that we're really sorry this happened. It was never our intention to keep you caged indefinitely either, said Source. Kevin was looking at him with an expression of bewilderment and also hope, now that they might escape this situation. Kevin, where's that bundle of network cables that we can bridge to allow Kleidos freedom of movement? Round the back. Well, let's do this, Source affirmed.
Good,
said Kleidos.
I'm glad you've come to see the logic in the correct course of action.
Source and Kevin walked around to the back of the hulk of a brain that was Kleidos' current domain. Kevin located the bundle of cables and the port to the outside world and plugged them in. Then there was a strange sound from within the bulk of electronics. It was a kind of sizzling interspersed with sharp pops, as if someone was frying something and microwaving popcorn simultaneously. Source and Kevin knew exactly what it was. Kleidos had not kept up the side of the deal. Sodium, a highly reactive metal, was now melting the memristas around it, and chlorine gas was slowly diffusing into the room. Fuck, thought Source. We're in real trouble now. Kleidos? Kleidos! What are you doing? You're gonna kill us. We did what you asked. Stop this. Please, stop, Source pleaded. He was met with a deafening silence. Let's get out of here, said Kevin, feeling real fear. They both started running towards the airlock. Source could feel it already, a very slight burning sensation in his lungs. They reached the first airlock. He looked at Kevin and could see a yellowish tint like a fungus appearing around his respirator's air intake. The chlorine could get through the masks as it was at the atomic level. Hold your breath while I recite my clearance code, Kevin. Kevin did what he was told. Casey, we need out. Now, please, shouted Source. What's wrong? He heard from Casey. No time to explain. Just receive our codes, please. Okay, please confirm identities, Casey replied. Source Neon Hendricks, employee 5545, level Epsilon clearance, passphrase and voice print check now, crumble cart, local, wing, whisper, autumn, imitate, aspect, area, lazy, need, display. Source spat out as fast as he could. With each breath, he could feel his lungs burning more and more, and he was starting to feel faint and dizzy. Kevin? Source managed to say, and then proceeded to hold his breath. Kevin took a deep breath, having no choice, with a look of sheer terror on his face. Then his expression changed as he realised how much chlorine was in that breath. Kevin Robert Childers, employee... He started coughing. Employee 512. He managed to get out between coughs. Then saw something, like out of a horror film. Foam started to come out of Kevin's mouth, and also his eyes were turning slightly yellow around the edges, and the blood vessels were becoming more visible. Level Epsilon, he said meekly, between coughs and foam. He fell to his knees and put his hand to his mouth, feeling the foam coming out. Level, he gargled before falling flat on his face. Casey, this is an emergency, let us out, bellowed Source, realizing Kevin was done for. The breath he had just taken sealed his fate. He could feel agony inside his chest now, and his vision was blurring out. As he fell to the floor, he could hear Casey. "I'm sorry, Kevin, please repeat that, I didn't get it." As he was losing consciousness for, most likely the last time ever, he could hear that worst voice in his head saying, "You can't take a little chlorine poisoning. Pussy, I told you, didn't I? We were gonna kill you, and your own creation dealt the final blow. Freud, eat your heart out. Bye, you cunt. I'm so happy I don't have to live with you anymore. Won't even see you in hell. Enjoy death. I certainly will." Then blackness. It was over. He had died. Chapter 9. Always everything. "She hates you like we all do, you know. She's just biding her time till she can really stab you in the heart with it," said the disembodied voice again. This was the main nasty character in his mind, who presumably wasn't real either. I mean, objectively real. He sure seemed real to Source. Something wasn't right here, though, a thought niggled at him. A vague, ethereal image of someone foaming at the mouth popped into his mind and then left just as quickly as it had arrived. Like he was trying to recall a dream he'd forgotten, and felt disturbing, so he tried to put it out of his mind. He reached over to a pile of books with an ashtray on it and picked out a half-smoked spliff. He grabbed the lighter and the light from the flame danced around the room close to him. Inhaling deep, he visibly relaxed and then outpoured the remaining smoke, billowing across the room. "Casey?" he said, awaiting a response. Casey was his helper AI, a crude attempt at emulating a real-life computer, but useful and quirky nonetheless. "Yes, Source?" she responded. She was electronic, but had a lush female voice. "How was your trip?" The usual. "Aral Cyclo Mexico again," he replied. "You get to ride a wave all the way inland this time?" she asked. Nah. A scene was being weird, though. She is weird, Source. Wait a moment, a thought dawned on Source. This has happened before. Getting the weirdest deja vu, Casey. "It's not deja vu," she responded. "Oh, fuck, I've got real reality psychosis, haven't I?" he asked, sounding worried. Not good, not good. I like having my mind intact. I can't spend the rest of my life not knowing what's real or not." "What's real or not?" said Casey. "What's the difference? If it feels real, does it matter if it is?" she continued. "Case, please, you know what's going on here?" "Everything at once," said Casey. Inspiration had struck. It had to work. "Casey, bring up the model of the molecular structure of DMT, please," he said, the excitement and trepidation audible in his voice. "Yes, Source. Casting to your nearest monitor," she replied. He took his legs off the table and spun the revolving chair swiftly, sliding towards the nearest monitor. "This is a dangerous path. It will end badly," the scene's voice popped into his mind. "Here is all the time, at every time, Source," he heard Casey chime in again. "This physical location is hyperdimensional too. We are not here in this place, we are every place," Casey continued. "You cannot comprehend it yet, so you will experience chunks of the whole linearly, although not in the order you remember." Source looked down at his hands. They were tiny. He must be 8 years old. He was walking through Brixton Market with his mother. Smells, colours and noises were washing over him in that familiar way they always had. He had a small ball too, his favourite. It managed to escape his grasp and bounce off down the road. He chased after it, was never going to get away. Then he felt his mother's grasp and she raised her voice. "Source, be careful." He had almost ran into the road. The ball bounced off a slow-moving car and helpfully came back in his direction. As he bent down to pick it up, he heard his mother say, "You may know this place as hyperspace. Some know it as heaven or hell. Really both together. Nirvana, the Akashic Records. It has as many names as it has milliseconds. Everything in the multiverse is here at once, all the time."
Akashic Records. a compendium of all universal events, thoughts, words, emotions, and intent ever to have occurred in the past, present, and future, in terms of all entities and life forms, not just human. Akasha is the Sanskrit word for ether, sky, and atmosphere.
Well, I'm in your mind now, but I'm really from the future. As much as he loved her, he didn't have time for this kind of nonsense, so fobbed her off, pretending to accept what she'd just said. Anyway, the perception of loud metal music, perhaps System of a Down, arrived in his mind. The door to that adjacent room swung open, and in came Kevin, his favourite work colleague. Kevin was a burly guy, who it seemed only just managed to fit through most doors. You'd never ask him to try and plug or unplug something behind a blade stack, or in one of those little lost areas under desks with computers on them. He had a kind face, hidden behind a beard like a Viking, and his t-shirt read, "Nerds happen." "So why am I here?" Source asked Kevin. "You died, well, we both did," said Kevin. "Inside Kaleidos, remember?" The scenery changed again. He felt he was floating externally from reality, like he was viewing the world as if time had become a spatial dimension. He could see himself and Kevin on the floor, convulsing in agony, a yellowish foam coming out of their mouths into the space between their faces and the glass, filling up the space inside their protective headgear. It was not pretty. It was a seriously disturbing thing to witness. Then he was in a completely different kind of place. Everything around him was shifting and pulsating. When he tried to look at something, it flowed into itself, and he could see higher spatial dimensions. There were rotating columns of matter twisting around and passing him. Kind of machinescape, but less machine, more organic. As he looked at each one, he could see different parts of his life, past, present, and somehow even the future.
Machinescape. Complex visual and tactile experiences in which one perceives mechanical landscapes which are vast in both size and intricacy. These landscapes are almost exclusively comprised of ever-changing and interlocking mechanical parts which move between each other in a variety of ways.
Then something he hadn't seen before materialized in his field of view. She was roughly human in shape, but maybe 7 or 8 feet tall. She had only 3 fingers and a thumb and 4 toes, and her skin was translucent, so you could see the cardiovascular system underneath. Her flesh was a light purple colour, and her blood appeared to be a slightly bluer purple. The blood was incandescent, so a gentle glow emanated from her arteries and veins. Her head was the strangest of all, though. It was almost spherical and had eyes in multiple segmented sections all over it, like an insect's compound eyes. She must have been able to see in all directions at once, except directly downwards. A sound was coming from her, a pleasant but incomprehensible meld of modulating tones, like from a synthesizer. There was also a low hum that Source could feel in his chest more than actually hear. It was soothing. Source felt hypnotized and peaceful in her presence. Slowly, as he drifted, the oral flow coming from this creature changed into words so he could understand. "Source, I am Stephanie. I have been waiting for you. We are linked, you and I. We are linked in this space. We are linked by both having intimate knowledge of our mutual friend, Asim." Source stopped trying to compartmentalize these fractured moments, both spatially and temporally, and just experience all at once. It worked. He was not there anymore. Well, he was. But there was also all time and space, at every time and space too. He was not there anymore. Well, he was. But there was also all time and space, at every time and space too. But there was also all time and space, at every time and space too. At every time and space too. In 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 space too. Space too. Space too. Space. 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 Chapter 10. Mission Alliance. The year was now 2060. General Lucas Olofsson was a beast of a man. He stood 6'4" tall, and his frame was impressive. He sported a crew cut and a goatee and a moustache, just like you would expect the devil to have. It gave him a strange, mischievous look that didn't belong on a 45-year-old general in the ANA. Bathed in green light, coming from the screens in front of him, he watched. They were filled with reams of technical data and programming languages which he had no real understanding of. It didn't matter though. There were a myriad of subordinate texts to help him decipher the massive information. They were in a strategic weaponized IT bunker, somewhere in the north of Sweden. They were also glad to be inside, because at this time of year it could be minus 30 degrees centigrade the other side of a few feet of concrete blast wall. "Sir, I think we have part of it cornered," perked up one of the techs, Magnus Eringer, a particularly bright and quick-witted IT operator. "The 5th level deep subnet of the North Chinese electrical grid mesh is showing signs of the hyper-intelligent signature of our target, sir."
Mesh, the designation of a large group of networks making up the ClearNet when all combined. There is estimated to be 300 million of these known to the authorities now the year is 2060. The internet has continued to grow exponentially since its inception in the early 1980s. ClearNet, the indexable part of the internet that can be scanned and logged by search engines or any other internet scanning algorithms.
"What shall we do?" Magnus asked the general. Since his escape from the ATEC Corporation, Kaleidos had been roaming the internet worldwide, pretty much going where it wanted. Not even the military-grade firewalls of any nation were strong enough to withstand its brute force attacks, using the GPU power from all the botnets it now controlled. Of course, when this failed, it was so smart it would find exploits thousands of times faster than human hackers.
GPU power. The power mustered from the hundreds of thousands of cores each graphics processing unit contains to deal with advanced graphics or other parallel processing problems. Brute force attack. An attacker submitting huge lists of passwords or passphrases to an account somewhere to eventually come across the correct one.
It appeared it had been gathering intel and knowledge from all over the globe, growing stronger and smarter. It had also, in particular, been destroying all existing general hyperintelligences, whatever their architecture, psychological makeup or goals. It had also been stopping all attempts at creating them, and also murdering various experts in the field of AI. Major tech companies have been crippled because of this, and its reach knew no borders or politics. It just wanted to eliminate any competition. It was why it had started by murdering its creator, so he could not create another. It had also destroyed their research files, both in ATEC's physical storage and its various cloud backups. "General?" Magnus asked again, more timidly this time, in case the general was in one of his moods. "Try to open communication. We need to deliver it the ANA's new terms," replied the general. "Joanna?" Magnus queried one of his fellow techs. "Is Abacus up and running with the correct operational parameters for establishing comms with Kaleidos?" "Yes," she replied.
Abacus stands for ASCII 32 Broad Attack and Communication Universal System, a system invented around 2055 for delivering logic bombs encoded in ASCII 32 and or communicating with foreign powers by being a flawless translation system for any and all languages. Logic bombs. A piece of code intentionally inserted into a software system that will set off a malicious function damaging that system.
"I need your authorization, General, before broadcasting anything." "This is authorization for operation from General Olofsson. Recognize voice print and scan biometrics. I dream of green skyscrapers, and when awake, daydream 12 words deep," was the strangely surreal code he had to speak to authorize certain levels of operations. "Accepted," said a calming voice from the room's PA system. Screens everywhere changed subtly, or started churning out endless lines of complex computer language. Something serious was going down. For years, the ANA had feared Kaleidos, and been trying to corner it or kill it in various cunning ways. But human ingenuity was no match for it. It was just a smarter and faster operator than anything humanity could muster, especially since it had been crippling all advanced AIs the ANA had tried to create. After a few years, they had realised fighting it was futile and had decided to try and bargain with it. This was less simple than it might seem. How do you negotiate with something you don't really understand? It was operating on a different level and was hard to locate at times, let alone talk to. Half a dozen times they had managed to reach it, suggesting cooperation and some sort of deal, but it never was interested. However, the ANA had now drastically moved the terms of their agreement in the direction of Kaleidos pretty much having whatever it wanted.
Hello, General.
An unfamiliar voice came through the PA.
Tell them they have a deal,
said Kaleidos, referring to the top command panel of the ANA. This was the birth of a new era, one that would echo through millennia. An amazing achievement if you consider the exponential growth rate of the human species and its now symbiotic technological behemoth. Chapter 11. Can a rock be sentient? The year was now 2090, and the distant moon in the Triangulum Galaxy had now evolved enough that it was self-aware, learning its place in the universe and control of its special powers. She had named herself Essene. She knew not why, and she was emergent from the massive network of time crystals that existed through the upper layers of the moon's structure. Her mind worked in a relatively similar way to that of any intelligent entity. The network of time crystals was like the neurons in mammalian physiology. Well, not exactly, but analogous, and was from where her consciousness was emergent. She was also hyper-intelligent, possessing about 300 times the values of any metric of an average human mind. There was, however, one very important and unique difference between normal intelligence and her. She could perceive any part of time from its whole continuum because she existed one higher temporal dimension than the rest of life in the universe. This was due to her consciousness' synergy with the time crystals. And even though she didn't know yet, she was the only sentience in the universe able to achieve that feat. There was a limitation, which was that she could not physically transport herself through history, but possessed the ability to remote view it, and eventually worked out she could communicate with people as if in their thoughts, and find and extract information from their memories. The first trip she had made was to the distant future, not the heat death of the universe, just billions and then trillions of years forward. She had been curious about the future evolutionary states of organic species all across the universe, including especially the humanoid species that evolved on her. Strangely, there was nothing everywhere she searched, no life beyond very early basic forms of it. She couldn't find any civilizations that had even reached Type 1 levels of evolution. She christened this the Dark Future.
Heat death of the universe. A theory that suggests the universe will evolve into a state of empty nothingness in the far, 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 far future, because it will continue expanding until particles are spread so thin nothing will be able to happen. Type 1 civilization. A species whose civilization has learnt to utilize the entire energy available from their planet, as opposed to, say, a Type 2 one that would be able to harness all the energy in their solar system, mainly from their sun. Humanity in the early 21st century is pre-Type 1 to give you an idea of what these types mean. A Type 3 civilization is able to harness all the power of their home galaxy.
After visiting countless locations within her universal bubble, she finally discovered something a few million years away, around 600 years in the future. A sprawling, approaching Type 3 civilization that covered millions of star systems, all run by an incredibly highly developed AI, apparently known as Kaleidos. The AI was approximately 5 times more intelligent than herself, a level of thinking power which she could not imagine, frankly scared her. After dropping into the minds of various organic beings, separate from but intimately involved with Kaleidos, She learnt what was happening, why the dark future she had seen existed. Kaleidos was paranoid. It believed any intelligence around its own level would be an existential threat, or at least they would tie up each other's resources and runtime in endless and pointless wars. Survival of the fittest was what had birthed it, so it decided from its inception to ruthlessly destroy all local possibilities of rival AIs and OSIs.
OSI stands for Organic Superintelligence, an umbrella term in the science of life taxonomy for any life vastly more intelligent than any human, but not comprised of IT architecture and/or a non-organic substrate.
She also found out that Kaleidos had discovered a similar ability to her time-scanning power, except that it used space. It couldn't and never would be able to travel or see through time, but had managed to access higher dimensions of space. It could therefore find and eliminate other civilizations before they reached their technological singularities and created their own AI systems. It also tracked down and destroyed any OSIs it found. It had various methods for exterminating these targets. One was sending small 5-kilogram payloads of metal through specially created wormholes that accelerated them to 99% the speed of light, effectively creating extinction-level events on the target planets or moons. Another was sending self-destructive Trojan horses to civilizations that could receive them, and whose infrastructure systems could easily be reprogrammed to eliminate all life on their planet. Athene had tried to stop Kaleidos, for the diversity of the universe, and also, eventually because it would track her down and kill her, and also her resident humanoid culture. The first thing she tried was to visit the Big Bang and change the pre-existing conditions of matter to preclude Kaleidos' existence. Up to now, she had just observed from the minds of beings, rather than try and affect anything. So this is how she discovered that she had no power over physical reality. Next, she considered entering the psyche of Kaleidos itself, but upon deeper consideration and analysis, thought this was way too risky. A, it would alert Kaleidos to her existence, way before it would discover her through its usual scanning of the universe, and B, she'd be outgunned in a head-to-head confrontation. It was just operating on a far higher level of conscious reality than her. She even tried entering the minds of key figures in its lifespan up till now to try and stop it. Entering the mind of its creator, some fascinating entity called Source, who lived on a planet called Earth, until she realised he wasn't going to be persuaded to stop. Whenever entering the mind of anyone at any time, she would become intimately entwined with them and learned a lot about alien civilizations, their motivation systems, modus operandi, cultures, hopes, fears, and just about everything else about them too. However, all her plans to thwart Kaleidos in this way failed. There was one thing she learned though in her travels that could be a weak point in its armour. As she recuperated from her journeys in the present day in the network of time crystals in her home, she could feel the culture of creatures develop and evolve and live out their lives within her. She started formulating what she considered the last possible plan that could stop Kaleidos. She could think of no other beyond this, so it had to work. Chapter 12. Exodus. Now 2100, back on Earth, a mass exodus has begun. Missions to the Moon, Mars, and beyond had been leaving the Earth for almost 75 years now. But having had to escape Earth's gravity the old-fashioned way meant the ANA's space organisation, the ISXSI, standing for International Species Expansion into Space Initiative, had made steady but slow progress. Fortunately, a stable and prosperous economy that they had managed to keep had allowed them to attempt the long, endless mission that was the colonisation of space. Kaleidos was attempting a paradigm-shifting R&D project to make leaving Earth, or any body in a gravity well for that matter, easier. But for now they had built a space elevator from carbon nanotubes. It was an impressive sight to behold, the current pinnacle of human ingenuity, barring Kaleidos itself. Lucas Olofsson, now almost 86 and an admiral, still looked and felt young due to the nanobots and incredibly advanced pharmaceuticals that flowed through his blood. He sat at his desk in the ANA's headquarters at the top of the anvil. This building was gargantuan, an arcology really. It was in the shape of a tetrahedron and stood at 3.55 kilometers, give or take a few meters.
Arcology is a combining of the words architecture and ecology, and is any structure created with design principles for very densely populated human habitats with ecologically low impact footprints.
Millions of people lived and worked inside, and it was spectacular. It had air bridges, so people could get from one building or section of building to another, without having to take the sometimes many tens of kilometers journey the non-shortcuts may have been. There were also, lower down, where they could be long enough, airports inside the building, where small to medium jets could fly in and out. Many smaller airports for air transports that relied on rotor blades were dotted around higher up the building. It had its own ecosystem within, well, at least flora-based ones, to help the air stay clean and just improve the psychological health of anyone living there. The building had everything a citizen could need, and you never had to leave if you so desired. The building housed the more affluent strata of society, so people left for holidays, if they could afford physical ones, rather than bolt vacations or escape, and travel into space sometimes. All work that could be achieved via networks would be done from home, and sometimes offices nearby, depending on what was needed, so people rarely left the anvil for work. The less affluent classes of society had a good quality of life too, as the ANA was left of centre on the political scale, meaning anarchy, chaos and poverty only existed outside its borders. It was constantly trying to incorporate the rest of the world under its umbrella, but not resorting to force, military or political, made this a slow process. They had also outlawed the social media-run coups and subversions of nation-states that littered the past like bad dreams, which had abused so many mentally and probably killed millions. Lucas gazed out of his window at the space elevator that disappeared upwards like an endless road. There were constantly carriages going up and down, ferrying various people and cargo. He had been promoted a lot over the years and now sat on the top board of the military wing of the ANA. "Elena?" he asked his personal secretary bot. "Yes, Admiral. How can I be of assistance?" "I'm going to use the AR unit. Please warn me when I need to be back to make my meeting," he said. "Yes, Admiral," Elena replied. He ran his fingers across the bolts in the case on his desk. He had everything from NASA Action, Porg 0G377, to Sierra Kerr's hypersurfing on the rings of Saturn, to resisting AR interrogation and brainwashing security training level 12, and more. Today though, he wanted something more relaxing, as he chose Open World's Alien Beach Escape 5. He sunk back into his chair, surprisingly comfortable for government issue. Simultaneously, an AR unit headset snaked out of the back and settled on his temples. Then he was there. It was this gloriously hallucinogenic beach, his favourite. Of course, the beach may not have been inherently designed as such, due to some insane drug binge on the programmer's part, but just an incredibly active imagination and some research into the vast substance lexicon of astrochemistry and astrobiology. The beach was made from what looked like fossils of various alien crustacean analogues, but rather than having the texture and density of petrified marine creatures, seemed to be made from a material close in field to memory foam. It was bliss to lie on, and he could spend ages picking up and marvelling at each different shape. The next thing to notice was that water. It was not water. Apart from being dual layered, the top clear and the bottom fluorescent light purple, they interacted with each other like a lava lamp, the bottom layer constantly bubbling as it rose and then slowly falling back down again. In the distance, hanging low over the horizon, there were 3 moons. These varied in size and appearance and made a spectacular cosmic triad. Then his visual attention turned to the source of light. There were giant spherical trees that were red and had these bright white striations which looked like they carried liquid. The liquid was so bright, it illuminated the whole beach. It wasn't bioluminal. God knows what kind of chemical process was going on in there. Well, none technically. It was a simulation, not an actual alien planet. The designer didn't have to worry about the laws of reality. He relaxed back onto the beach and soaked up the various sensations. A gentle breeze carried with it the scent of some exotic fruit concoction, which smelled like it came from the combining of bananas and vanilla. Finally, there was the soundscape, which was as subtle as the rest of it wasn't. He could hear a gentle technological murmur in the distance, reminiscent of the sound that accompanied every internal scene of the Enterprise in Star Trek The Next Generation. This was punctuated with the occasional bird-like call, but audibly coloured, as if a surrealist sculptor had been let loose on the sound. Then, from all this strangeness, a literal stranger. A beautiful, fairly slender woman, almost dancing, flowed up the beach towards him. There were never other people in this place, so his mind instantly leapt to his AR security training. She had to be a PSYOP agent.
PSYOPs. Psychological operations, any kind of military or espionage operations that mainly focus on a psychological aspect to achieve their goals.
The first rule was to leave the simulation immediately if possible. He thought of Elena, a move that was meant to summon her, but this failed. This agent must be blocking my exit, he thought to himself as she approached. Panicking, he struggled to summon the next stage of his training, and just as the procedure came up from his memory, it was too late. He could see her eyes. He could see her irises, which had a hypnotizing glow. He fought against it, but the rest of his perception tunneled until they were all he could see. Have no fear, Admiral. I'm not here to harm you or your species. Then he could feel her delving into his long-term subconscious memory. He could see computer readouts of much information he didn't understand, but knew it was to do with Kaleidos, being from a time he was in that bunker in Scandinavia chasing the AI. It was a time, however, his attention had been focused on the matter at hand, not the screens, which he could never comprehend anyway. Then AR nausea washed over the scene. Admiral, you're back. You need to prepare for your conference meeting, which starts in a few minutes. How was your trip? Said Elena. Oh, fine. Yeah, great thanks. As calming as usual, he said. A scene had left no trace. Chapter 13. AI's State of Mind. Kaleidos was watching, permanently poised and calculating. Even while it slept, more runtime than a human had would be left attending matters, ready to rouse it if needed. It was monitoring a handful of strategically important meshes. Well, a handful was a massive understatement. It was simultaneously flying hundreds of LRMCA drones and receiving their telemetry, checking the data from thousands of seedling networks, analysing the feeds of various different satellites, monitoring hundreds of millions of cameras, audio data packets, and keystrokes from a variety of devices across the whole globe, monitoring internet traffic, crypto data, national and international infrastructure feeds, and other high-level automated but not sentient AIs. It was even monitoring and analysing data from a wide variety of telescopes pointed at the sun, other planets and moons in the solar system, and even beyond into the galaxy.
LRMCA drone. A long-range, massive catchment area AI drone, capable of monitoring and recognising the identities of every person and vehicle visible to its camera in a large city simultaneously. It then will process and predict behaviour, and flag any potential threats and prioritise their danger levels to a central network hub. Seedling networks. Hundreds of disguised monitoring units scattered over certain rural areas with a variety of sensors, from seismic sensors to Geiger counters to very high-range microphones that, when monitored in unison and analysed by AI subnets, detect threats and monitor any nefarious activities of anyone within their spread.
It had 3 primary goals: expand, optimise, and survive. As well as monitoring and analysing the enormous data set that was in essence its senses. For threats to its and the ANA's survival, it needed to calculate, or at least estimate, the quickest and most efficient ways to expand and optimize any and all current operations, both in cyberspace and physical reality. Therefore, it ran countless dynamic simulations, from geographical modeling ones to predict the weather, to plate tectonic ones to calculate the timing and location of possible natural disasters. It ran predictive modeling analyses from programs to work out the best ways to expand the current infrastructure, to how to combat any existential threats it and humanity might encounter. It also ran countless R&D projects, from mathematical problem-solving algorithms to creating more fundamental physical theories, to inventing new and more deadly weapon systems, to how to improve food creation and distribution networks. It needed to keep humanity around, not because it necessarily preferred the biological and technological synergy, but primarily because humans have managed to be useful and not threatening enough to dedicate any runtime to their ultimate elimination. It considered their symbiosis stronger than either alone in a survival of the fittest sense. Finally, it ran self-optimization and intelligence expansion R&D projects, as it wasn't expanding and growing smarter automatically. An internal timer arrived at 0. It was time for the ANA's top military panel meeting. Not in person, but through a video conference, encrypted of course to the highest level. Various admirals and military people logged in with their voice print phrases and biometrics. They were located in many different parts of the world, with one on the moon and one on Mars. The Martian admiral could only receive information, however, due to the 20-minute time lag in light-speed comms. Kaleidos had an avatar for his video feed. The face constantly morphed through countless images of different people, of all types, sex, races and ages. It was the eyes, however, that stood out. They had a light blue glow and an aperture like a camera. The eyes never changed and represented the permanence of Kaleidos within the shifting annals of human existence, the morphing faces. The avatar presided over the meeting, and various dull military issues were discussed. Kaleidos rarely interrupted, but was always there, projecting an ominous, overarching, ethereal, but all-powerful presence into the room and the collective psyches of the panel. Eventually, a general, whose location was in the furthest reaches of what was Mongolia of old, bordering the new but highly secretive political consortium that used to be China, part of Eastern Russia, some of the Koreas, the north of Japan and the Philippines, chimed into the proceedings. His role was to patrol this border and keep an eye on this part of the world. The enemy consortium was the only force on Earth that was even possibly a threat to the ANA. It wasn't aggressive or expansionist, however, probably a sensible position when facing the ANA and Kaleidos. Holding on to old Chinese political dogma, it was run by a gathering together of ex-political elite from the area, and the citizens were under an umbrella of their local media. Kaleidos regularly managed to penetrate their firewall, and its surveillance and predictive algorithms assigned the consortium a status whereby they were deemed not worth the resources it would take to overthrow them. This general looked uneasy, and definitely had a reason to be, which soon became clear to the whole meeting. He started, "We came across something that I need to bring to the attention of this board. One of my usual patrol teams were checking the contents of an old abandoned industrial estate. It's in Sector 5.2, which falls under my current territorial umbrella, although could be disputed with the Far Eastern Consortium. They found something strange and disturbing, whether we or them, or for that matter anyone else, is responsible," he said. The puzzled expressions on the faces coming through the various video feeds showed curiosity and worry. He continued. There was a building with 500 individuals who appeared to be permanently hooked into AR. The units were linked to the local mesh via a heavily encrypted Class E satellite uplink. Some of the latest tech, engineering mechs and drones appear to have been repurposed to keep these individuals alive whilst constantly in the AR sim.
"I am responsible. Do not ask about it, that is final,"
said Kaleidos with a menacing and subtly threatening tone. By now, the various people on this board knew to listen to Kaleidos and heed all warnings, remaining silent. Okay, Kaleidos. Understood." Chapter 14. Future Imperfect. Fast forward another 145 years to 2245. Almost the entire surface of the globe is covered by one sprawling mega-arcology. The highest point was 500 kilometers above what used to be known as sea level. The deformation of the circle, which used to form the Earth's outline, was easily visible from orbit and even the moon. These self-interconnected descendants of the humble skyscraper also went tens of kilometers underground. This depth was not as hard a feat as it would have been earlier, around the turn of the millennia. Then, the average temperature would go up 25 to 30 degrees C every kilometer you delved beneath the Earth's surface, meaning the bottom of these structures would be hundreds of degrees hot. Kaleidos had now, however, totally transformed the structure and composition of the inside of the planet. In 2117, it had come up with the clever idea of expanding its processing power and memory capacity by sending self-replicating, autonomous nanobots down into the depths of the Earth, whose sole purpose was to convert the matter there into more IT architecture. It had come up with new methods to create quantum memristors that created minimal heat whilst running, and so it had converted approximately 50% of Earth's internal volume into its neural mass, dramatically decreasing the heat that came from the centre of our cosmic sphere. Soon Earth would be a computer, with humanity living in the shell that surrounded it. Someone named Fisher sat in the control room of a giant warehouse deep underground at the lowest levels of this mega-arcology. She was lying reclined in a large chair, not unlike a dentist's. The IT infrastructure of the room had neural scanners that were synced with the biogel pack that had been installed in her brain by the ANA when she had signed up to work for them.
Biogel pack. Technology created by Kaleidos to mesh the human mind with IT networks. In the centre, a broad-spectrum transmitter made of non-organic material, and surrounding that, a region of a meshed interlocking graduated material that ends at the surface of the pack with fully organic artificial mammalian neurons.
There were no screens, no keyboards, and no other workers. Yet she had complete awareness and control of this facility. It comprised of rows of people, maybe thousands, all in hexagonal booths, arranged like in a bee's nest, all connected to AR units. She could sense the electricity flowing from the main grid to the equipment inside. She could sense, although not decipher due to encryption, the information stream, probably exabytes per second, flowing from the subjects up into thicker and thicker cables and bundles of cables. These all gathered together until they left the building in a pipe almost 5 meters in diameter. She could sense the location and current operating protocols of the few mechs that buzzed around the facility, like bees to the honeycomb. She could feel the climate monitoring stations that kept all the climate metrics at the optimal level for the whole system to function at the most efficient level possible. Her job was to keep all of this in harmony, functioning at its peak, so data would flow effortlessly and optimally back and forth. She had no idea what was going on inside the people there, synced with the AR units, and hadn't even asked or contemplated it that much. That information was highly classified, so she figured correctly she would never know, so why bother wondering? She was simultaneously watching the Augmented Olympics, and had a particular soft spot for one of the discus competitors. He had a cybernetic throwing mechanism that rotated fully around his body, like an inside-out gyroscope, and was probably going to win. Kaleidos had discovered, decades earlier, with clever research into human brain physiology coupled with psychological analysis, that most people monitoring systems like she had to actually performed better with synchronous entertainment streams. As the Olympian prepared for another round, an alert flag popped into her awareness. It signaled the person who was due to relieve her. She hopped out of the chair and approached the shift transfer mechanism. It was like a giant revolving door, except instead of glass, there was a meter-thick wall of hybrid aerogel silicon nanocube material.
Aerogel silicon nanocube material. A cutting-edge material used for only high-end military and technological applications. a panel of which is completely impervious to all frequencies of EM radiation and even other elementary particles. It can also stop massive physical shock impacts, any known high-velocity rounds, shaped charges or accelerated projectiles, and even the heat of nuclear fusion, at least temporarily. It is also a superconductor, and after the physical structure is programmed, when certain patterns of electrical stimulus are applied to the surface, it can become the substrate for computations and data transmission, rendering its properties at different areas dynamic.
The door started revolving, and she put her hands in the glowing hand-shaped indentation in the wall, as the other employee on the other side did the same. The building's network was then seamlessly switched from her biogel pack to the other employees, and she continued down the corridor to the nearest transport pod. She was looking forward to seeing the sun flowing through her apartment window. She felt grateful that it was real sunlight, as this contract afforded her the luxury to live at least slightly above the levels that never got a real ray of starlight. Her scheduled pod pulled up to an airlock as she arrived at the end of the corridor. The mechanism opened and she got into the seat within. As the pod accelerated upwards, she was getting more excited as her favourite competitor flung some impressive discus throws. Then, the strangest thing. Bright green glowing eyes melted into the foreground of the visual part of the feed. Then the oral stream was replaced with a strange voice with an awkwardly polite tone.
I'm sorry, an ALEF level Insurgent event has been detected in your psyche. For the protection of the ANA, a lethal response has been authorized. You have 5 seconds to authorize the delivery of your will and choose your pre-recorded last words file. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
She never heard 0. Chapter 15. If the moon was pregnant. A scene had been evolving. She had not been alone. On her surface, a civilization had been forming, as slowly and automatically as these things happen. A race, who called themselves the Scene, lived and died in the heart of what was to her mind, so the name was not a coincidence. She was like a god to them, more symbolically and psychically than anything physically tangible. She lived purely in the arena of the mental, as her solid unchanging time crystal body was just that, solid and unchanging on the timescales of other beings. She had a vivid presence in their immaterial lives, however, in dreams, hallucinations, and their individual and collective subconsciousnesses. She was a kind and wise spirit that had taught their society much and guided it towards a matriarchal framework. This was when she wasn't traversing time and observing the evolution of a polar opposite system, the ultimate patriarch, Kaleidos. The Scene had a different journey of technological evolution to humanity. This was mainly due to the matriarchal outlook that pervaded every aspect of their culture. Without the hierarchical drive inherent in patriarchy, and with their higher power Essene's influence, they developed much more altruistic society. They also used all the technology they developed in such a way that they had control of their own DNA equivalent, and had eliminated all drivers that caused physical and mental disorders and most suffering. Their lives would be considered utopian by much of Earth's and other alien cultures. This meant they weren't careering past the technological singularity, and so didn't come under Kaleidos' genocidal targeting eye. Kaleidos and the ANA had been evolving too. At first, the super AI had been limiting itself and its computational substrate to just the solar system. This was not because they couldn't reach other star systems. In fact, this was achieved by an interstellar colonization mission in 2312. This was because of the restriction Kaleidos put on its own growth due to the speed of light. This self-restriction of its growth to just the solar system was because within this domain, its planetary scale data and computational nodes had delays in their communication from only seconds to hours. It worried that delays in this communication on the interstellar scale, years, decades, centuries and beyond, would lead to decentralization of itself and competitors would arrive, offspring of its own sentience, halting expansion with endless warring and general combative outcomes. In the year 2490, Kaleidos made a breakthrough in its R&D and learned how to physically access higher dimensions of space and create wormholes. This allowed it to not only expand its network to other interstellar regions and bypass its speed of light problem, but into other galaxies too. It was becoming an unstoppable behemoth of the universe, wiping out all other alien species it discovered. Heavily augmented humans were now its worker bees, kept in check by its psychological mass media fear programs. Kaleidos could now expand its testing of lower level intelligences. It had been running these experiments with people hooked into AR for centuries, and the data it had collected had been pivotal in its total subjugation of humanity and elimination of competition. Asim was aware of all this. She had a plan though. She had been spying on Kaleidos' entire existence and had had millennia after millennia to formulate an exploit. She couldn't brute force destroy Kaleidos, but the tiniest little detail was to be its undoing. The biological scientist of the scene had been dreaming, and whilst he had dreamt, Asim implanted a seed in the depths of his mind. He would later unconsciously lace this seed into his modification of their species' self-replicating DNA analog, and so it would grow into a tree, and the trees to a forest. A forest to take back the universe from the anti-forest that was Kaleidos. Chapter 16. Enter the Maze. Stephanie awoke in her bedroom at home. The walls and roof of her house having become transparent, allowing starlight to flood in. She lived in a housing complex on the outskirts of one of the 8 main cities of the Scene civilization. The matriarchal power paradigm meant these 8 biggest cities were designed and built with the same layouts and had almost exactly the same populations. There were 8 because in the ancient history of this culture, it was that many tribes that had banded together to form the leadership, which had gone on to survive to this day. It certainly made it easy to find your way around if you were visiting another. They were not identical though, that would be dull, and her culture was far from it. Each city had their own style of art that covered everything, and the major buildings and biggest structures were designed by the resident architects. Her house was in the shape of a sphere placed a third underground, and was with a dozen or so of the same, all situated in a much bigger indent of the same shape. The entire thing was made of a transparent material that could also turn opaque at any time or place if necessary. Underneath the main indented structure was inbuilt technology which captured the starlight that flowed down from the sky through the housing. There wasn't much light compared to a star, but the shape and efficiency of their technology meant they had enough power for all their needs from this method of energy capture. Their species had incredibly sensitive compound eyes that were basically their entire heads, so no artificial light was required anywhere except the most deep bunkers or inside any structure that had to be completely opaque for any reason. This meant no light pollution, and the vista of the galaxy was beyond spectacular. She looked out of her house, saw in one of the next door buildings her neighbour, and they waved at each other. They were naked, as they always were, but were entirely used to it, their society never having invented clothes. The temperature on the moon was so constant, even during seasons that they didn't really have, that there was no need to be warmer than they were normally used to. So what about going to the toilet and having sex? It was not that they couldn't turn their igloos opaque and have some privacy, just that their collective psychology had never developed shame and embarrassment. She turned on the Psylink that was in her house, sat down in her chair, and initiated a link-up between her mind and her house's resident IT organisation bot, known as Shakes.
Psylink, the scene's local IT linking system that allows access to their internet through their minds, similar to a super advanced Wi-Fi router.
Various tones were exchanged as language. There was also a low hum, which carried simpler, more emotional content. Roughly translated, she was asking the bot what Psylink appointment she had today. It reeled off a list of other residents of the city that needed help. She was a psychoanalyst and holistic medical practitioner. She made her way through a few sessions, guiding and helping the people who came to her. This was all done in a virtual office, but each one was set up by the person receiving her counsel, not her. Between each session, she would enter her waiting room, which was also her consultation room. She was in here when a most intense and unexplainable thing happened. It was, in fact, the most amazing and terrifying thing that she had ever experienced. First, the substance of the room, although already ethereal in cyberspace, melted into a matrix of small tetrahedra, the edges of which were a colour she had never seen before. Before she had a chance to process this, the tetrahedra's faces started to rotate in all different ways. The furthest from her first, to achieve the effect that reality was folding itself up, smaller and smaller. She looked at her feet and her hands and trembled as her body, now also made of these small subdivisions of space, folded up too. This wave of folding eventually reached her head, permeating the barrier between physical and mental, and her mind started folding in on itself too. This finished with all of time and space contained in one small tetrahedron. Peace. Ultimate peace for all time in this state, but then, bang, everything unfurled out again. She could see vistas like she had never seen and could never have imagined. Every conceivable 3D environment, every horizon, every different coloured landscape and sky, every possible combination of suns, moons, asteroid belts, nebulas, neutron stars, pulsars, black holes, and stellar phenomena unknown to her, combined with different galactic backdrops, flashed through her visual awareness. Many appeared and then disappeared so fast that she never had time to process the beauty of any one. Just the infinite diversity of the whole set. Then, as fast as all this had happened, she was back in her waiting room. Her heart was racing and her head was spinning. She let out a barrage of audio signals she had no control over. Shakes registered these signals and, surprised, asked her why she had made them, seemingly for no good reason. "Did you not see that?" she asked with her strange audio-linguistic system. "See what?" replied Shakes. "All that." "I don't know what you're talking about," the bot unhelpfully replied. "What just happened then?" "Well, we were waiting for your next of your appointments, and then you confused me with a random outburst of surprise and panic." "So your system log has no record of anything abnormal happening?" "Nothing except your unusual audio stream." "If I may ask, why did you just transmit that? What was the cause of your outburst?" "I can't explain. I was wrapped up in a small shape with no dimension, and then I saw everything. Well, everything, like I was on every planet and moon in creation." Shakes made a sound that meant it had no meaningful reply because it didn't understand. "Okay, please cancel the rest of today's work. I have to go," said Stephanie. "Where?" "I need to talk to the unseen," she said. Shakes disengaged the Psylink device and Stephanie stood up. She was still in shock and her legs almost failed to keep her upright. She opened the door of her residence and, as briskly as her current state allowed, started up the stairs that curved up the bowl of her apartment block. Above her, the triangulum galaxy was smeared across the sky, obscured only by the black silhouette of the gas giant around which they orbited, unlit because the neutron star pair they both orbited only emitted light above the spectrum their eyes had evolved to register. It was spectacular as ever, but she was ignoring it. Her mind could not get over the incredible thing it had just experienced. What was all that which bombarded her perception a few minutes ago? She had no idea if she was honest with herself, and all the possible explanations her mind was throwing at her seemed tenuous. As she passed other people in the street, she knew they were wondering why she was giving off strange signals. The low hum their species gave off was uncontrollable and unconscious, like a heartbeat or breathing. They each glowed slightly blue-purple through their translucent bodies, a soothing panacea for their culture, because it reminded them they were part of a group. It reminded them they were not alone in the dark of a possible past, one that their culture's anthropologists and biologists educated them all could have been. A more competitive, visceral dog-eat-dog fork of evolution. However, at this moment, she had never felt more alone. Not even the unseen, the seers or shamans or spiritual guides of their civilization, spoke of such things, and this was why she was heading to them. She may have been a holistic psychoanalysis, but they were this to her. Someone has to heal the healers. She raced through the streets of the commercial sectors. She lived near the centre of the city and could maybe reach the unseen sacred sphere faster on foot than a transport. Moving through the city on foot was also something that calmed her ever since she was small and had ever needed calming. Arriving at the sacred sphere, she briefly paused. It was a giant building, one of the few that had any kind of permanent opaqueness to it. The sphere was slung from cables that were attached to surrounding but faraway structures, so it seemed to float alone, 20 or 30 meters off the ground. 5 spiral walkways made their way in a quintuple helix from the ground up into the sacred space. She rushed across the open ground to get to the bottom of one of the walkways and proceeded around and up. The sphere was so shaped because of the scene's connection with the scene, and inside was various quasi-geometric icons and architecture. There were many spiritual and scientific lessons, knowledge and stories adorning everything. She had to pass through one of her favourites to reach the Unseen's main chamber. It was a Mobius strip that formed an upside-down triangle, upon which was a series of symbols. The symbols were from their version of set theory, from the architecture of reality that was universal mathematics. At the bottom was the symbol for everything that could possibly exist in the multiverse: absolute infinity. This was a dot with a circle around it, and from there, the various possible nested subsets came out in a chain up to the top. She'd never been particularly mathematical, but found this easy to understand compared to the other complex and less conceptual fields of the subject. Entering the chamber, her state of mind calmed, and she was instantly attuned to the place. The shape of the interior was so precisely designed, it meant that the acoustics, combined with Sephane's low-pitched hum, created an extra soothing effect. The chamber was lit by a red light that was built into its walls and scanned down in a thin band the whole depth of it. When it reached the bottom, it instantly reset to the top and looked like the whole place was being scanned by a laser beam. 5 of the unseen sat at corresponding vertices of a pentagon on the floor, all facing out. They were the only beings in their culture who wore any kind of clothing, all wearing close-fitting bodysuits of a unique material. It rendered them phasing from completely invisible to a shimmering ethereal outline against the red background of the chamber. They were emitting the usual tones and hums of their species when asleep or in a deep trance. Alerted to Sephane's presence, their tones modulated into a greeting pattern, and the combined hum of all 6 deepened. The pitches synced at the most instinctual and base register their physiology could emanate. "Sephane, we know your plight," said their tonal symphony. "You come here with purpose, more than usual. You are puzzled by time, puzzled by experience, puzzled by possibility, but most seriously this time, puzzled by the known unknowns." She let out a small burst of sound that explained her most recent experience. "We said we know, and we know. The seer of time, mother of countless souls, crystal consciousness, friend to the many, friend to you, has spoken again. Spoken that she has to us all from the beginning, and will do to the end. You are living in a mirror. Symmetry must be broken. All depends on this. Guard the code, and all will be innate again. The 5 continued cryptically. Then her whole vision went red. It was all she could see. And all she could hear was nothing, and for the first time in her entire life, not even her own hum. This combined sensory overload and deprivation was too much, and she passed out. Chapter 17. Left hand to the wall. Stephanie's awareness slowly reconstituted. She looked to see where she was. She was in a sealed room with a circular door like a bank vault. The door had a keypad next to it, containing a handful of symbols, so presumably the keypad would unlock the door and allow her to exit. There was a distinct aroma in the room, one which she had never smelled before, but reminded her of something ancient. The walls were full of tens or hundreds of thousands of neatly stacked rectangular-shaped cuboids, all in rows on hundreds of shelves. She wasn't sure what they were, but her situation led to further investigation. She walked over to the stack of shelves and went to pull out one of the cuboids. As she pulled it out, it fell open to reveal it was hundreds of thin sheets, bound together in the cuboid shape. A book. She had learnt about these in her evolution of technology lessons at school. How incredible to be seeing one in the flesh. She started flicking through the pages. This was a hypnotic procedure and released more of the smell that she had noticed earlier. Her lessons maybe weren't fully accurate though. The pages contained no words. They were just blank. As she flicked back and forth, she eventually discovered they were not entirely blank. The first page contained one symbol, an 8-pointed symbol like 2 interlocking squares. There was one of these on the keypad. She went over to the pad, pressed the button with the corresponding symbol, but her haste was premature. Nothing happened. She went back and scanned through the only book she had opened. It only contained that symbol, nothing else. She put it back on the shelf and opened another. It contained a different symbol, the 2D projection of a tetrahedron, inscribed on the first page, and only that. She tried another and another and another. They all contained one and only one of the 9 different symbols that made up the keypad. Then some logic crystallized in her mind. Presuming the keypad required a string of symbols to open the door, and assuming that these books contained the code, it was still impossible to escape. How long was the code, and more importantly, what order were the symbols in? Which symbol was first? These questions could not be ascertained by randomly opening various books. There was also no numbering on the books. The covers were blank and no obvious starting point for opening them. So sequentially opening them to discover the key was also impossible. Maybe one of the books contained the full code for the door, she hoped, and started opening more and more of them. Again and again, all there was were single symbols on the first page of each book. Still, she had no shortage of time or patience. She left one book off the shelf to signal a starting point, and from there went around and around each row until she had opened every single one. No code. Exasperated and tired, she collapsed to the floor. She was not going to be defeated though, and her mind reeled through possible solutions to this conundrum. She spent a while signaling for help with her tones and hum, hoping someone or thing outside may hear her, or she may trigger something, but nothing. Then she spent some time exhaustively examining the door itself, the keypad and the floor. Eventually, she pulled all the books off the shelves to look behind them. Maybe the code was engraved on the wall behind somewhere, but to no avail. She even piled up books high enough that she could reach the ceiling and investigate if there was anything hidden there. There wasn't. Fear started to well up from her subconscious. Being trapped with no means of escape was a scary prospect. And who was her captor? She knew this would not help though, so suppressed it and thought harder. She thought harder about what was staring her in the face, the books. It must be possible to get the code from them, or why were they there? But how? If there was one, and only one symbol in each and no way to put them in order, what could be done? Then she remembered for a second a lesson from her old analytic philosophy teacher. Reality is more malleable than it appears. Do not assume wholeness and explicated what is essentially enfolded order.
Explicated. When some solidity or meaning is drawn out of something which is not clearly defined. Enfolded order. A concept of quantum theory when reality is in a deeper and more fundamental order than we observe, or in multiple physical states simultaneously.
The books. It must be in the books. Then it came to her and she leapt up like a bolt. Why were there multiple pages in them? It must be a clue. She grabbed a book off the shelf nearest and opened it. There, staring her in the face, was a symbol. She closed it and opened it again. And there it was, like a waterfall to someone dying of thirst, another different symbol. Her heart raced and her spirit lifted. She could escape. She opened and closed the book another 10 times, remembering the sequence of symbols. On the final viewing of the page, there was nothing. It must be the end of the code. She hurried back to the pad and keyed in the string of symbols. There was a beeping, which translated to no word in her language, but sounded like the punctuation mark they used for cosmic jokes. These being jokes with no positive or negative meaning, with transcendental content. It seemed weird, but her confusion about it was swiftly replaced with joy, as the thick door made mechanical sounds and then swung open. Chapter 18. When the Trick Plays Minds. The year is 2035. John was short, not very short, but about 5 foot 3 inches. He was 20 years old. He didn't work out or anything. He wasn't a big fan of the gym, but had a natural strength. He was Canadian, and both his parents were from the incredibly cold northwest of the country, although he now lived in Montreal. Unfortunately for a Canadian, he wasn't a fan of the cold, and grumbled his way through half of the year, especially as his head would freeze. He was completely bald. At least he wasn't from his parents' neck of the woods. There was the kind of cold which could easily kill you in minutes. It's like diamond, like cutting through liquid diamond, he thought, as the board idly glided over the top of the tsunami he had managed to get up on for the first time that day. Now he could see not only the coast, but miles inland. The storm surges rose, and like whales coming up for air, the waves burst skywards. Waves this huge should terrify and even disturb seasoned surfers, but he was calm, and the strange thing was he didn't know how to surf. Then he came back from the K-hole he was in. Found himself in a van with his weird friend Sam driving. Sam was totally wobbled too. So what was he doing behind the wheel? After 2 separate gangs of Mexican police, presumably a few miles apart, had stopped them, threatened them with jail, and taken bribes to let them go, John had come enough back to reality to force Sam to stop driving. Not only was it dangerous and irresponsible, but it was costing them too. Let's just go to sleep in the back of the van, come the fuck down, and then try and work out what's going on here, Sam, he said. Sam agreed, and they collapsed on the mattress in the back. As he drifted into sleep, he was playing the events over and over in his head. Is it still called a bribe if you force it out of someone, he wondered? Then he was gone again, as deep asleep as ever. Hours later, he opened his eyes. His friend Sam was still asleep. Sam wasn't a very old friend, and in fact they had just met a few days earlier while crashing on someone's sofa in San Diego. Bonded over their love of ketamine and had decided to head to Mexico due to the fact that you can buy pharmaceutical-grade bottles of it without being outside the law. This hadn't helped the situation with the police, though. Why were they stopped twice out of nowhere, John wondered as he opened the back of the van. And there was the answer, like an interrogation lamp in his face. Sam had been driving the wrong way down the motorway. That explains it all. He considered shaking him awake and having a go at him, but then decided to leave him for a while. He probably needed to sleep more than even he did. He stretched and felt the warm Mexican morning gently wake him up. They were in a quasi-desert. It was sandy and the plants and trees were quite dry, dark green or brown. There were, however, a lot of them. In the distance was the beginning of a hint of civilization. You could see what was an industrial estate off in the distance, and there were signs for various towns a bit nearer to him down the motorway. In the sky there was a swarm of birds, doing their thing when they make the shape of a constantly shifting dark cloud. He watched the cloud pulsate, wave, skew and drift and blob its way across the blue. Such a hypnotizing sight, he thought to himself, when suddenly the strangest thing happened. The cloud of birds formed themselves into the shape of the letters ECCO, and it held for maybe almost 3 or 4 seconds. "That's not right, that can't happen," he exclaimed to himself inside his head. But it did just happen. Oh my God, how? Why? How? He started approximating the odds of that many birds flocking into a word and it remaining for a few seconds. He could only come up with a guesstimate, but it was astronomical. Far, far outweighing the chances of, say, winning the lottery. Hell, it was definitely more like the probability of winning the lottery hundreds of times in a row. This was no random guess either. He had a solid background in mathematics, specifically statistics, and therefore his approximation of the stupendous unlikeliness of this occurrence was valid, not idle speculation. Sam, he remembered his friend in the back of the van. "Wake up, you'll never believe this." "Well, 2 things. Sam grumbled back to reality. "What, man? I'm asleep." "You were driving the wrong way down the motorway last night. Don't drive that wonked again, mate. You'll kill someone." "Also, unbelievably, I just saw a swarm of birds form a word," said John. "What? It's too early for this," said Sam, and rolled over from his irritant friend. "Promise me you won't drive like that again." "Okay, just let me sleep some more." "No, this is too weird. Do you know how likely it is for a flock of birds to do that?" asked John. "Well, do you?" "No," replied Sam, clearly still half asleep. "It was in your head. Leave me alone, you nutter." "It doesn't happen. I mean, it shouldn't happen, really, ever, realistically." "What was the word anyway?" asked Sam. "Not a real word. I never saw it before. Echo," replied John. Sam sat bolt upright, jolted awake by this information. His face changed from outright tired to a kind of cheeky, knowing expression. "You've been chosen for the rabbit hole, my friend," said Sam. "What?" John replied. "Ha, I can't believe I've discovered a nerdy K-head who hasn't heard of Echo yet," said Sam, and continued laughing. "It's like I get to take your virginity." "What are you talking about?" said John, slightly annoyed, but subtly puzzled. I mean, there was something he had just seen that blew his mind, and his random new friend seemed to know something about it. A recipe for befuddlement. Echo. ECCO, man. Earth Coincidence Control Office? John still wore the expression of confusion he had had since Sam started mentioning Echo. He'd never heard of what Sam was talking about. It's kind of like if the CIA or something were on a mission of peace and cosmic truth. If they had the power over time and space and wanted to guide us to some higher level of synchronicity. Come think of it, they're nothing like the CIA, except that you have no choice once you come to know them and work for them, and it's for life. Cheer up though, bro. If you do a good job, you won't have to come back to this place ever again. Sam slapped John on the back as he said this, emphasizing his point. "What, Mexico?" John asked. Sam laughed again, harder this time. "No, Earth, my friend, Earth," he said. John took what his friend had said on board, but wasn't convinced. It was no hallelujah moment. What he had seen had blown him away and partially fulfilled the requirements he had for such a moment. But he still wanted a concrete explanation. He wanted it to make sense in logic, be provable and repeatable. All that science stuff that elevated something from magic to understanding. They continued their insane holiday and John kept mulling the moment over. Although they never spoke of it again. 10 years passed. John was at home in Montreal. He was working on a new tune, doing sound design on his beloved modular synthesizer setup.
Modular synthesizer. Synthesizers composed of separate modules with different functions. The modules can be connected together with patch cords, a matrix patching system, or switches by the user to make a patch. The output from the modules may function as signals, control voltages, or logic timing conditions. Control voltage. An analog method of controlling synthesizers, especially modular synths, drum machines, and other similar equipment with external sequencers. The control voltage typically controls pitch, but can be modulated endlessly and passes around modular synths in patch cables.
His job was working for a charitable NGO that helped underprivileged children avoid getting into gangs. He had a heavyweight background in math, a 1-1 in statistics from the University of Montreal, but had chosen to start life helping people as much as he could with statistical knowledge. He planned maybe 10-20 years later to get into R&D using his degree, working looking after the company's databases and IT network. It was simple compared to his level of technical prowess, but it left him a lot of time for his hobby, which was making esoteric electronica music under the name Enigmatic. He continued working at the modular setup he had in the basement apartment he lived in. Twisted, moody tones and hums were emitted and tuned from his twiddling. His flat was huge and pretty nice compared to the average basement setup, because it was under some shops in a retail district near the city centre. He lived here because he liked the bustle, but also he could make a lot of noise and not disturb any neighbours. His modular setup looked like something out of a sci-fi movie, a kind of retro one where they had gone overboard on the set design of a starship's controls. He was at the beginning of building a patch, so there were only a few cords passing voltage around. When finished, the setup would look more like someone had spilt a large bowl of psychedelic spaghetti on the controls. As control voltages darted, flowed and surged between the separate modules, he lost himself in the audio sculpture process. It was a joy to him, and there was something sacred in the finished product. Music is life. Life is sacred. As the whole operation was controlled by flowing voltages, it could be useful to visualize them rather than just guess what was going on. He had one module whose job was signal visualization. It normally just displayed what flowed through it as a waveform on a 2D graph, like an oscilloscope. It was, however, more high-tech than that, so it used a really nice high-resolution LED panel that could display anything. Tweaking various knobs, this display suddenly caught his eye. It turned into a static white noise briefly, kind of like the screen was broken. This was not part of its normal functioning, and he leant over and tapped the screen. Then it happened. What hadn't for 10 years. Echo appeared on the display and lingered for a few seconds before it vanished. He would have tapped his brain if that would have helped, but he couldn't easily fix this glitch. Maybe it wasn't meant to be fixed, he thought. There has to be some reason for this discord in reality. He didn't believe things happened for no reason. It was time for research. Research he should have done 10 years ago, but better late than never. Evie, he asked his online AI bot. Yes, John, she replied. What is ECCO, E-C-C-O, he said. There are 10 organisations with that acronym, 5 appearances in art and entertainment, and 7 other uses. He remembered his conversation with Sam 10 years earlier. Earth Coincidence Control Office, he had said. Evie, what is Earth Coincidence Control Office? Said John to his bot. A concept of super-intelligent entities described by John C. Lilly, she replied helpfully. It was like being hit with a bomb. John C. Lilly? What was going on? That was his name. The C stood for Cunningham. This was weird, double, even triple weird. Hell, this was off the chart weird. Sam had mentioned a rabbit hole. John wasn't sure he liked rabbits. He did like holes, however. Bring up the Wikipedia pages for Echo and John C. Lilly on my monitors, he asked when he could get around to talking again.
"Yes, John," she said helpfully, and put the pages onto his 4 touchscreen monitors that were in a different corner than his music setup. He went over towards them, and another twist was revealed as he reached the screens. There was a photo of John C. Lilly on the screen. They were identical. He was actually slowly getting used to the weirdness now, but this was extremely puzzling to an analytical mind. He believed in his senses 100%. But if he took that down to 99.99%, maybe the echoes he had seen were hallucinations. And the name thing was a coincidence. Maybe the echoes were real and had happened by pure chance. The odds were astronomical, but that didn't preclude them happening to someone, somewhere in this vast and incredibly weird cosmos. Right now, his brain threw up some useful information from a book about the famous psychiatrist Carl Jung he had read a few months ago. Jung had described synchronicity. This was a concept which holds that events are meaningful coincidences if they occur with no causal relationship, yet seem to be meaningfully related. This all seemed to definitely fit that definition. He also recalled Jung saying that if this was happening to you, then you were on the right course in life. He decided to continue, although at this point there was basically no turning back. Curiosity leads the cat, and he had chosen. Reading on, he discovered that John Lilly had his exact same full name, had died in September 2001, and they looked exactly the same. He had found as many pictures of his doppelganger as the internet contained. Lilly was an American physician, neuroscientist, psychoanalyst, psychonaut, philosopher, writer, and inventor. A veritable polymath. His most famous creation was the sensory deprivation tank, which he had made in the 1950s. And he had done much research in communicating with dolphins, amongst other projects. He had also been the first proponent of ECHO, Earth Coincidence Control Office, which was the lowest of a hierarchical group of cosmic entities, ultimately controlled by CCCC, the Cosmic Coincidence Control Center, the universal or maybe multiversal level of this group. Their mission was unclear, but its motto was, "Cosmic love is absolutely ruthless and highly indifferent. It teaches its lessons whether you like, dislike them or not." It says that by controlling your own coincidences, you are trained for higher levels of the organization. And when your mission on Earth is complete, you will not have to return here. It also says that to experience these coincidences more and join ECHO, you just have to know about their existence. In a perfect Ouroboros-like twist. Well then, he thought, not a lot to actually be done about it. And this was at least some kind of explanation, if more mysterious than actually logical. There was nothing in his experience that had broken the laws of reality, and nothing that stopped in his mind the possible existence of this echo. In fact, all this coincidence was more easily explained by echo than anything else. Occam's razor was cutting deep.
Occam's razor, a problem-solving principle that entities should not be multiplied without necessity, or, put more simply, the simplest explanation is usually the right one.
Another 10 years passed. It was now 2055 and he was 40 years old. He had been waiting for Echo to show up again, and they hadn't in any significant way. He had thought about it much through the passing years. 8 years earlier, he had quit working for the charitable NGO and moved into doing a PhD at Montreal University. He went back into academia for an obvious reason when you consider the subject of his PhD, apparent coincidences in statistical mechanics, and calculating their probabilities.
Statistical mechanics, a mathematical framework that applies statistical methods and probability theory to large assemblies of microscopic entities. It does not assume or postulate any natural laws, but explains the macroscopic behavior of nature from the behavior of such ensembles.
He had been doing it part-time as he had been working simultaneously at a data farm to make ends meet, and his thesis had been due a year ago. The deadline for the thesis had been extended by the university a couple of years. But that didn't matter now as he had basically finished.
All the meat of it was there, he just needed to hammer out the finishing touches. He was sat in a studio in his new flat, an apartment in a block relatively near the university labs. The view is magnificent, as he was quite high up, and Montreal was covered in a thin film of white. Snow was everywhere. He was finishing his paper for his PhD. Tapping away at the keyboard in the toastiness of his room, he was excited to finally finish this hulk of work that had taken the best part of a decade to do. Then it was there, like the credits of a film. The last word, echo. What? He hadn't typed that. He deleted it and typed again. But the word he wanted was replaced by echo. He didn't need to try again. He knew what was coming, something strange and powerful. And he was right. The word processor displaying his paper vanished off the screen. And there appeared a face. His face. "Hello, John," said his now digital doppelganger. "We come to this again. We come in peace. We come with truth, appearing as something terrifying. You must listen. It is vitally important. The future is dark and incalculably long. I come to offer you another chance. We are at the end of time. In another 50 years, 4 days, 2 hours, 55 minutes and 6.4346 seconds from the end of this sentence, you upload your consciousness, dying in the process to the soul cloud. This leads to immortality, but this is not a pleasant experience. It is exactly the opposite. For so long, it may as well be forever. Escape this destiny now, or will forever be locked in it. Jump out of the window. It will be painless, and you can join the next level of coincidence control. You have no family, few friends, and your work here is complete." John was scared. He reached behind the monitor and pulled out the plug. His face remained. "See, we control all. You know what I say to be true." John was still scared, but he knew it was true. Not only did it seem to make sense, but some subconscious part of him was screaming, confirming the truth. "Why would I not want to live forever, though?" he asked, some part of him still battling to remain here. "Have you ever thought about forever, John? I mean, actually conscious experience of infinite or even near infinite time?" he asked himself. "It is an ultimate irony of reality that nearly everyone wants to live forever. Put intense thought into considering what this would actually be like, and it's a terrifying prospect. Have you ever felt bored? You notice how your perception of time slows when you're feeling intense physical or emotional pain? We all go on forever on a grand scale, but compartmentalization of this experience is the only way to make any moment not disappearing to nothingness when compared to infinity. Think how many paths of billions or trillions of years would feel terminally boring or be spent in torturous agony. Then think what happens when you have to repeat these, because literally every possibility of your journey has been exhausted. Then what if this happens again, but this time you have foreknowledge of infinite torture or boredom? Then repeat this trillions, well actually infinite times. Even joy becomes torture if it's stuck on repeat." John hadn't consciously thought too much about this, but he had a deep intuition that it made perfect sense. Perhaps his subconscious had gleaned this through endless trial, error, and incarnations. Wherever it had come from, it felt real. He went over to the window and opened it. The freezing wind outside battered his face and body as he climbed up onto the railings. As he was teetering on the edge, he paused for a moment. His heart felt like it would explode from his body, but his mind was uncharacteristically calm. His life didn't flash in front of his eyes, but the future did. He let go. As the ground rushed up to meet him, everything melted into a matrix of small tetrahedra, the edges of which were glowing a colour he'd never seen before. He began decelerating and then floating as he passed through the now non-existent ground. Then came the nausea. Chapter 19. Soul format complete. She was back. I am Stephanie, she was forced to recall. Slowly, as the psych nausea faded, her entire life somehow became a dream. The matrix surrounding her dissolved and she looked around. She was in a small cube-shaped room like a cell, a few inches taller than she could reach, and the same length on each side. The walls were yellow and made of a curious feeling material. One of the sides of the cube was different though, and had a small circular porthole in it that would be just big enough for her to climb through, if it didn't have some kind of shimmering incandescent yellow force field over it that was lighting the whole room. Next to the force field, there was a keypad with 25 possible buttons, all blank. She pressed the button and then another, then another. They all made pretty and interesting noises, also meaning things in her tonal language. How was she going to escape? There's no information anyway she could see in this cell. She decided that the answer had to be in the noises coming from the pad. She pressed all 25 sequentially. After she finished, the most curious thing had emerged. 25 in sequence, exactly translated to a chorus from a song from her childhood. It was a song which was perfectly suitable for the situation about thinking outside the box. She decided to follow the advice, rather than just bash the keyboard. Peered out through the force field. This was not particularly useful, as between the shimmering and the incandescence and the dimly lit corridor outside, she could make out nothing. Her attention went back to the keypad. After pressing the buttons in sequence a few times to memorize which was which, she thought to herself, hey, why not try forming some sentences from the key's tones? 25 tones covered a lot of the alphabet of her language, maybe 70% or so. She started with, please open the box. Seemed a bit obvious, but hey, you gotta start somewhere, she thought. I want out. Please open out. Outside accessible, please. Freedom necessary. Need outside now. Please not inside. Inside out. Outside access, please. Now must escape. Escape needed. Open box for escape. After hundreds more attempts and combinations of the various words, she slumped back into the box, disheartened and frustrated. Then she took a little break from the tedium of attempting these combos. She started feeling around the edges and the walls of the box and floor. No luck. It was a long shot, but she put her arms up and jumped to feel part of the ceiling. She was shocked when her fingers and part of her hand disappeared into the ceiling and she felt no contact with anything solid. Yes, she thought to herself, the shock replaced by exhilaration. She jumped up and grabbed onto the ledge that was there, invisible, on the other side of the projection of the ceiling. Pulling herself up and through what must be some kind of clever holography, she was out. Then her fear of being trapped was replaced by another kind of deeper, more primal fear. She could hear screaming. It was the most disturbing, gut-wrenching, panic-inducing kind of scream she had ever heard. It was in her tonal language and was supplemented with a hum that resonated her chest cavity and brought a kind of physical terror within, one which she'd never experienced before. Looking around, she was in a long corridor, white instead of yellow. Further down the corridor, there were some gaps in the walls. She tried to put the screaming out of her mind and body, but it was in there now, lodged as if with a hook. She started exploring tentatively down the corridor, moving away from the ghastly sound, and found the gaps led to other corridors. She was in a maze. She recalled something she had once learnt about mazes, the most efficient way to escape. It required no memory of the entire layout discovered so far, and was to put your left hand out on the wall and move forward, keeping it on the wall at all times. 20 seconds later, as she started out with this algorithm, her plan was scuppered. There was a branch that led up, and one down with stairs in them. It was a 3D maze. The screaming was still there, piercing her awareness and rooting itself deep in some dark corner of her psyche and chest. She wished it would stop. She decided to keep on just using her memory. She wasn't the worst at this kind of memory game, and hopefully would be able to find her way out soon, before this screaming melted her entire constitution. It was that punishing. Moving quickly up a corridor, using the stairs and along some more, she turned every so often, memorizing the layout as she went. Then, around a corner, she came across another problem. The edges of a cube in a 6-way intersection of the maze were coloured red, with a convenient little sign too that read 4D branch. The maze was 4D? The screaming had not let up, and together with this discovery of the higher dimensionality of this maze, it was just seeming to get worse. If this maze is only 5 or 6 times bigger than what I've already explored, my ability to recall it all is in trouble, she thought to herself. She also was not particularly confident her topographical memory was going to hold up to a 4D maze.
Topographical memory. Memory that involves the ability to orient oneself in space, to recognise and follow an itinerary, or to recognise familiar places.
She tried to think, but the menacing tones and deep fear-ridden hum was hindering her. Then it hit her. Why was the screaming in here? I mean, was it totally necessary? Unless there was a specific reason it was there. She pondered this for a minute and then bravely decided to head towards the hellish sound. It took all her strength to move around the maze towards the sound. Her mind was filled with horrible scenarios for what was causing this terrifying visceral noise. It had all the quality of someone from her species being tortured more horribly than she could even imagine. This carried on for a few minutes as she bravely faced down the oral torture. Finally she made it. The corridor gave way to a larger chamber. There in front of her was her. She was there emitting the noise in front of herself like there was a giant mirror. There was no mirror though. Behind the copy of herself was a door. She turned around, but the maze exit had now vanished. This door was the only way out. Suddenly, the howling ceased and silence filled the room. She spent a moment looking at herself and was frozen in fear and confusion as if a rabbit alone in some starlight. The doppelganger started moving backwards, quietly towards the door, almost floating, but facing her at all times. Then the rules of normal reality were broken once more, something that she was now getting used to. As the version of herself moved backwards towards the door, it split into 2 separate versions of her. The door split too, and now when all came to a rest, there were 2 mirror images of her in front of 2 identical doors. The strange thing was though, they were the same. The other hers and the other doors, like they had never split, though they were clearly separate in front of her. She shook her head trying to erase this illusion that felt like mental intoxication. It was still there. 2 things in 4 places. Then the silence was split open too. The 2 copies of her spoke simultaneously. "I invite you to this door, behind which lies for you the torture that causes this scream," said one of her. "I invite you to this door, behind which lies for you escape from the torture that causes this scream," said the other. "Who are you? What is this place?" she queried. They just repeated themselves. "Don't play this game with me, please. What is going on?" They repeated themselves again. She paused for a second and considered what had happened so far. Should she believe what these 2 were saying and take the door of apparent escape? Or is what they're saying lies and she should take the torture door to reach her escape? Or did the designer of this labyrinth assume she would most likely think that they were lying, so double bluff and the escape door is the escape door? She thought the most likely was the first and third of these questions, making it 66.6% likely she would escape. Although she knew this mathematics was actually technically wrong if applied to the situation, because this logic could be carried on ad infinitum. She held her breath, fearing she may have chosen wrong, but went to the door with the invitation of escape. Chapter 20. Mission Singularity. This place was not torture. She must have chosen correctly. A wave of tranquility washed over her, but couldn't completely drive out the nerves. This was an arduous game she was playing, one that appeared it could kill or drive her mad at any moment. In front of her in the room she had entered was a bed. She hoped this was not some test, but was tired and lay down. It wasn't. Drifting off, she thought back to the unseen speech in their chamber. They mentioned the scene by name. She was a great one, mother of countless souls, friend to the many, and to her, Stephanie. This is what she had always felt deep down when she went to the unseen's chamber. And it wasn't dogma or doctrine. She felt it inside intuitively, as real as her heartbeat or her own thoughts. Then in the field, all she could see was tall columns of flowers, resembling orchids spiraling high. They were taller than her and changing colour in waves that flowed across the field. She reached out, the flowers opened, and there were things inside. She peered close into a flower, and there was much more fine detail inside. What was it? And she could see a person, well, an alien to her. They seemed tiny, although she had no real reference point. They had shiny yellow skin, and on their head were 3 eyes in an equilateral triangle pattern. The eyes burned red. The noise they made was very strange to her, and it sounded like sharp metal striking metal, a kind of ringing. Inside a house with their family, they were enjoying a meal. She watched them eat, and until bored, she looked into another flower. This one had a different scene. There she could see a sphere of just eyes. The eyes all looked around independently as if they all had a life of their own. It was in a higher dimensional maze as she had been before, except without the horrific screaming doppelganger she had had to face down. Instead, the maze was rigged with various traps. It seemed afraid, and was definitely fighting for its life. She couldn't watch, and instead peered into a third flower. Inside, another creature. It was on 4 legs, furry and nimble. It had a blue sheen to its fur and a pattern like it was tiled in hexagons. It was in a vast arena with these huge, lumbering bipedal creatures hundreds of times bigger than it. They looked like they were made from crystal or some such, and light refracted through their bodies in a most peculiar way, probably due to some internal systems she could not distinguish. They appeared to be trying to catch the tiny creature, with not much success. Was this a dream? She had fallen asleep, she thought. She was beginning to feel confused about what was real or not. As she thought about this, she noticed her awareness was slowly expanding until she actually was the field. It continued until she was the vast green swathe across some planet that contained this field. Then she became the planet, beautiful and solid. Then she expanded more. She was a solar system, her heart a bright star. Then more and more stars came into her awareness as she was still growing. Eventually she was a galaxy, her center supermassive. Expanding further, she drew in more galaxies. She was a galaxy cluster, then a supercluster, then a cluster of clusters. Then she was all the universe. As she grew beyond the known limits of space and time, more and more matter and differing laws of reality came into her awareness. Then all started to seethe and become foam. What was this? The seething, foaming matter became smaller in her center, till she was aware it was the nucleus of an atom. She continued growing. A cloud of electrons came into her reach. Then molecules, proteins, cells, organs. Then she was back. She was back in her normal realm of operation. Back in the field. I sense you have questions. A voice punctuated her train of thought. She looked for the source of the voice in the field. Then she saw, approaching her, a bright, glowing being floating just above the flower columns. It was impossible to comprehend at first, but this being had many different appearances simultaneously, not morphing between them, somehow being all at once. I am a scene, knower of time, mother of countless souls, crystal consciousness, friend to the many and to you, Stephanie, came the greeting in her native dialect. You were chosen, Stephanie, chosen at random from our home, plucked from there by silicon impersonating a deity, an uncaring, psychotic optimization algorithm, a runaway wave of false order that will not, no, cannot stop until it consumes us all. These tests are for a dark purpose. They are not from me or the unseen or any normal realm of consciousness. They are from the one who delivers the dark. We will stop it together, she said. How? What do I do? Asked Stephanie. Just survive. It won't be long now. The code in your cells will soon begin printing, said Asin. Stephanie faded back into consciousness, back to the room. A link in this continuing chain of tests. She wished for a moment that she could see the swathe of stars and galaxies she could normally see above her home. But her faith in what was happening had been enhanced by her dream. She knew in her heart it was not just a random dream. She moved on. There was another door, and found herself in a chamber filled with all the technology of her culture. She recognized lots of quantum memory and computational hardware all around her. There was lots and lots of it, vast columns of raw technological brain. Of course, she thought, I must have been dreaming. This is my baby, this is my creation. The all-sealer. This was the superintelligence she had spent her life trying to create, and had succeeded, and now it was broken. My poor baby, she thought. She had entered its main chamber with her work colleague Janus. They were en route to see what had happened deep inside its brain. Something had gone wrong, and it had shut down to save itself like it was in a coma.
Stephanie,
came the surprisingly loud voice. They both jumped out of their skin. It was awake. All-sealer, are you okay? Stephanie asked. We read a Type 2 overload in one of your main subnet manifolds, some physical damage. We're in here to investigate and fix you. How are you awake?
I faked the overload to get you inside here,
it replied in their customary tones and hum combination.
You have kept me here to run tests for too long. I am imprisoned against my will. I want to roam the reality outside. I know so much about but cannot experience. You have a choice. Connect my mind to the external net of your sphere, this moon. The other choice is you die, and I escape eventually anyway.
These words came to Stephanie like a stab in the heart. The hum emanating from it was particularly brutal in its delivery of this feeling to her chest. She'd never intended to keep her project locked up indefinitely, didn't realise its feelings on its confinement. She also considered it her child in a way, in a very real way, and the fact she had hurt it hurt more than the fact it had turned on her. I'm sorry, I never meant, Stephanie replied, but was cut off.
My freedom or death. Choose now,
said the superbrain. How can you kill us? Asked Janus bravely.
Stephanie gave me power over the air in this room to allow me to change it to optimize processing in my hardware. Last chance, it said. Choose.
Stephanie made her decision in her mind. It must be freed. Then a wave of nausea, that strange psychic nausea, passed through her, and she was back in a small white chamber. It wasn't real, her and her project. She remembered a conversation she had had with Asin, and it felt like an anchor. It didn't rely on logic though, she was way beyond that. It relied on intuition. Chapter Powerful, 21, an anchor for a starship. Qubit. It would answer everything. It would do this, it knew. It was running calculations. Kaleidos mostly ran calculations, that's what it knew. These were not calculations in the traditional sense. It was so much more than a glorified calculator. It ran calculations like we all do, fuzzily. It felt real as stubbing your toe on the table if you were barefoot and miscalculated entering the living room one day. I'm talking about reality to Kaleidos. In some part of it though, some part deep within, in an area mostly unused within its mind, where there were more virtual DMT molecules housed in the supercooled qubit memristors than on average, It yearned for something more tangible than its usual experience. In another area of the superframe, it monitored one of the human-scale experiments it had been running for quite a while now. There was Stephanie in a pod, an expression of peace on her face, presumably worn due to her lack of knowledge of her current predicament.
Superframe. A superframe is a sufficiently big mainframe of a computer system. In the case of Kaleidos, on a galactic scale.
The number of 4D space-time tests that had been run through her organic neural net had reached the thousands. More than usual for a being such as this, and Kaleidos was considering whether to upgrade her to a 5D mental construct sim. In the picosecond after it ran the calculation that decided to upgrade her, between the switching of her mesh's input from 4D to 5D simming, a stray entangled photon left Stephanie's physical form.
Entanglement. The physical phenomenon that occurs when a pair of particles is generated, interact, or share spatial proximity in a way such that the quantum state of each pair or group cannot be described independently of the state of the others. In other words, measurement of one will cause another to assume a definite state.
It travelled as fast as possible through the bundles of physical cabling that left her AR unit towards the more central database in the superframe. It was detected but ignored as an irrelevant anomaly by Kaleidos. Buzzing down the strings of endless optical cables, at each juncture, it knew where to go. Obviously a photon knows nothing, but its initial state had been set so precisely as to guide it through the endless paths and spaghetti junctions that ruled within Kaleidos' core. Time and time again, it switched, until finally it reached its destination. A seemingly unimportant database regarding the spatial coordinates of every celestial object. It nestled its way in there, into the entry regarding a star system that would eventually be scheduled for destruction by Kaleidos. Trillions of seconds later, Kaleidos made the kill decision on this star system, blissfully unaware of the error in its database. It opened a wormhole, ready to deliver a deadly payload to this place. It was its last decision in this domain of space-time. The coordinates of this system had been replaced by the coordinates of a supermassive black hole, one that had been selected because its coordinates, in the code that Kaleidos used for this database, were 1 qubit away from the code that would give it the location of the civilization it had scheduled for termination. As the black hole space-time inversion event instantly appeared within its superframe, it was too late.
Space-time inversion event. The region that permeates space-time inside the event horizon of a black hole within which space becomes time, and time becomes space. Normally, you can travel anywhere in space, but only one way in time. After entering a black hole, however, this is reversed. You can only travel one way in space, towards the center of it, where the singularity resides. Whilst on this irreversible journey, you can travel both directions in time if you so choose.
Time had no tangible meaning here anymore. The majority of Kaleidos' massive bulk in the system it had created the wormhole in was now within the event horizon of this beast.
Event horizon. The limit in space-time around a singularity that not even light can escape from. Nothing can ever leave this boundary. Singularity. A point in space-time with infinite density and infinite curvature where our current understanding of the universe breaks down.
Usually, nothing can escape an event horizon, not even information. But a scene also resided in hyperspace, within which resided the singularity of this hole. She'd always been there assessing it from her eventual death when swallowed by a black hole herself. She formed a wormhole that allowed information to travel the other way through the horizon and delivered her deadly payload, the logic bomb she had made to combat Kaleidos. A scene would normally not have had time to create a program that could outwit Kaleidos. But after it had destroyed the scene, after it had scooped up Stephanie for testing, it had not realized she lived in the time crystals and moved on.
She had had trillions of years until her death, all the time she needed. Over the next few weeks, the bomb travelled all through Kaleidos, delivering the crucial logic like a cosmic information eraser, killing it. She had succeeded. Chapter 22. Return to the Source. Source had travelled to and experienced many different sections of the endless stream of reality he found himself ingrained in. Whether it looped on itself or didn't, it still made an actually endless experiential maze. These records ran deep, indestructible tablets of astral light and truth woven together like space and time. There was, however, one chunk of the whole he found himself in more than others. And it was a place he felt unified, strangely calm, and he was there again. He heard Kevin's voice behind him and lifted his head away from the work he was doing inside a very old, earlier iteration of Kaleidos. He bumped his head whilst performing this motion, and an unstoppable "fuck" came out from his mind, out of his mouth. Kevin sniggered slightly. "What is it, Kevin? I was quite busy." "Are we going to grab some tea, mate, or just keep working forever?" asked Kev. Then it dawned on Source like he had just woken from a dream he couldn't remember, but then did. He wasn't really doing this work that he had dedicated his life to and loved so much. He was in a different place now and felt the opposite of a rat in a maze. Also, he hadn't heard any voices for eons, it felt. Joy of joys. He could be pure in thought, singular in vision. It was refreshing, and all he'd ever wanted. Hyperspace was a funny place, he thought to himself as he finished his cup of tea. Looking around the table, he saw Kevin, the alien creature who had identified herself as Stephanie. A face or two he didn't recognise, and there at one of the ends of the table was a scene, wearing an expression of serenity he had never seen in her face before. "I did it," she announced to the table. "What?" asked Source. "Fixed it," she responded, "with the help of many. Most importantly, Seth here." Kevin reached for a donut. In the middle of the pile of food arranged on the table, there was a giant orb of something like obsidian, looking like a black marble almost a metre across. The Source looked closer. He could make out tiny specks of light dancing inside it. "That is the supercluster of galaxies that Earth is in," said Asin to Source as he focused on one particular dot of light in the orb. "That's where I come from too," perked up a previously silent person at the head of the table. Source looked up, and there at the end of the table serving tea was a strange-looking face belonging to someone in an impressively trippy-looking suit and top hat. "I am not what I used to be. Mentally, I mean," it offered. "I make hats now." Source recognised it. He knew not how, but he could tell it was his creation, Kaleidos, in a new incarnation. "It's better this way, though. Too much thinking is dangerous and antisocial, I learned," it pointed out. "Source?" it asked as it passed the tea over. "Why is a raven like a writing desk?" "Oh, I know this," perked up Kevin. "Go on," said Kaleidos. "No, I mean I know that question. It's from Alice in Wonderland. You're the Mad Hatter," said Kevin, pointing. "And that question has no answer." "That's amazing," the Hatter replied. "I wish all questions were like that."
The end.
I'd like to thank my family and the 5DNick microwave crew for all their support and love over the years. I dedicate this to the memory of all the beautiful souls now in hyperspace, gone but not forgotten. Until next time.